We have a pretty busy agenda tonight. We're going to be hearing from the town about the second quarter results. We'll be hearing again about the municipal FY16 budget. We'll be hearing from the Acton-Boxborough Regional School District about their FY16 budget. There'll be a report on the Acton Leadership Group meeting and some of the usual Finance Committee business. To eliminate a lot of the suspense for anybody watching on TV, yes, the snow and ice budget has been fully expended, and we're in a deficit situation at this point. I know it's hard to believe. Yeah, serious under budgeting.
And it's really just been since our last meeting, right?
Really? We were in great shape the last time we met. Of course, in between, we were snowed out once. First item on the agenda is public participation. If there are any members of the public here that like to address the committee on something not on the agenda, step up now. If not, I will recognize Mr. Barrett for the FY15. Oh, Steve Ledoux himself is going to deliver this? Oh. Okay. We are honored.
And there's no truth that the polar vortex follows the Board of Selectmen meetings. Seems like every time we've had to cancel it for snow for the last 3 weeks.
Has the Board of Selectmen met recently?
Thursday night. You were there. You were there.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, committee members. Tonight, we sit before you with a presentation on a couple of things. The first thing, we have our standard reporting package for Q2. We've also retrofitted that presentation with some slides on the FY16 budget. And there's also, after us, there's also a separate presentation from Director Halley on transportation. So, without further ado, can everybody see that, or do you want the lights off? Or sometimes if we put the lights off, the crowd tends to thin out. So the results that we're presenting tonight are through 12/31/14. The data should be on the town's website tonight. It's a article-by-article summary of the expenditures, and there's a general fund revenue breakdown and enterprise fund breakdown, and that's all on the web. I would say that in the last few years, our web-based financial reporting requirements have increased, and I think as we go forward, this will be an area where we'll spend a lot more time on. So the quarter report can be found on the town's homepage. The general fund revenues for the town, the top total revenue category, we're at 51%, 52% almost. Beneath that is property taxes. Again, we are blessed by the citizens in this town. The collection rate is absolutely marvelous here. We're ahead on collections. State aid, we're ahead versus the average. We've been reimbursed for our SBAB money. Local receipts, as the committee knows, the lion's share of that's motor vehicle excise. It comes in after January 1st. However, I am proud to report that we grabbed a report early today, and in total for FY15, we've already billed about $2,815,000. So even though this says the actual was at 25%, that's correct, but I did a little digging into January and February, and we have completely billed out the $2.8 million in excise for the year already. So that's a good thing. We're going to be ahead on our excise. So again, those are the main metrics. As you folks know, the committee asked, and I think it's really interesting, the committee asked for prior year actuals to be put in, when we worked on the presentation. So general fund revenue, we're in a very strong revenue situation. If you look at our expenditures, and again, we use encumbrances and purchase orders, and we use blanket purchase orders for fuel and some other items. So in terms of a linear or time-phased extrapolation, you're not really going to see it. We're at 55% expended through 12/31. Again, that doesn't take into account all the snow that we've had since. That's the general fund high-level shot of revenue and expenses. We then go into the different enterprise funds. So the first one is the ambulance enterprise fund. The one thing I want to point out is it looks at first blush that our FY15 actual revenue was a little light at 31%. However, that's using the FY15 base of 1.3 million. That base includes about $570,000 worth of capital purchases. As the committee knows, the FY15 budget had a good amount of ALS and paramedic startup costs in there. So from a budgetary perspective, we had to kind of increase that budget. If you pulled out our capital out of that, you would come way down to like a $766,000 base. So that 31% isn't anything to be worried about. It's just on that larger base. And we weren't planning on funding that larger base with fees. So if you looked at the FY14 base for ambulance, it was like $766,000. So if you looked at that revenue divided by the 766, you can see that they're right in line. This is more of it's one of the nuances of governmental accounting and how DOR has us handling things. So that's the ambulance enterprise fund. COA van fund, as we reported at Q1, the LRTA has been extremely slow in paying the town. I do remember at one point last week, I had a check from them for about $8,000. So they're still light on their revenue, but they are getting a little better and coming in, those funds. The transfer station and recycling fund, there's a couple of things here that might pique your interest. One would be the $1 million fund balance reserve for Neswick liability. That has been replenished into that fund, and in that fund, it will be available for appropriation at town meeting or at a special or at any town meeting. So that's the first thing. The other item is, on the expenditure side, we're running a little ahead, but we use encumbrances for our trash removal, so a whole year's worth of encumbrances for the trash are in there. Nursing fund, well, it's been well documented that they're having some revenue problems. That is here. That also includes bullet one, the $165,000 that was appropriated at the special town meeting. So, but the one thing about nursing that you'll find is that even though there is a deceleration on their revenue, you will see that they try to keep an eye, and they really try to keep these expenses down. So we're going to be short on revenue to the budget, but we're also going to underspend on the expenditures. So that's how that fund carries the day or makes it through the day. And again, this fund is under review, and we're trying to keep an eye on this. The septage fund, this is right within the parameters of where it needs to be. Healthy fund balance as well. The sewer fund, the revenue was a little light. I have to get the capital assessments to the schools for FY15. That'll help move that number around. Also on the expense side on the sewer fund, there's about $900 to $1 million of debt service that we pay the MWPAT. They got a new name now. It's not MWPAT, but we pay that all in the first half of the year. So that's why the FY15 expenditures on a linear basis are higher. Here, here's the snow and ice budget as of from the accounting records. The POs and the requisitions, they're literally flying in as we speak. So I grabbed a report from accounting like at 10:30 to do this slide, and the town accountant said she didn't want to give me the report because there were more encumbrances and more requisitions being entered. So we're officially, as the chairman has noted, we're officially in the hole on snow and ice. So at this point, those are the standard, that's the standard reporting package for the committee. Manager Ledoux was going to walk through the 16 budget, Mr. Chairman, or do you want to stop here on any questions on the quarterlies?
Let's pause for a moment and see if there's any questions on the quarterlies. Anybody? Herman?
With regard to the nursing fund, at the end of this fiscal year, that enterprise fund goes away, and everything, if my memory serves me, or if I understand correctly, then the revenues as well as expenses are now part of the operating budget. So whatever it is, you're going to close it out to zero, and that's never to be seen again as such as an enterprise fund. Is that correct?
Yeah, the enterprise fund will be closed, as of June 30th. Any, cash that's remaining would be rolled into the general fund. Its results or its budget is now residing in the general fund, excuse me, in a discreetly presented org or department. It'll also have its own general fund revenue account. So you're absolutely right.
Doug?
Good evening. On the nursing fund, we will be able to track what's happening in that collection of income and expense as a separate matter going forward. The people that are dedicated to it, as well as the revenues that are received, will be visible and readily ascertainable.
It will. It won't. It won't have the same self-contained set of accounting records like an enterprise fund does, but there will be a separate general fund department for these expenses, and there'll be a separate revenue line, so we'll have all of the inputs that we had before, so we will have all that data available.
It will be separate from the public health nurse, so that, what I'm after is it's absolutely determinable what's going on.
Yeah, in fact, it's the man to the left here, he wanted it separate from the public health nursing budget, so we have a separate department org in the general fund.
I noticed there was a whole spate of advertisements, as it were, on ActonTV, and a consistent effort on the part of those who support the nursing service vigorously to engage in some marketing ahead of whenever the task force is. I gather there's a group that's going to come forward with a marketing plan, but I'm driving at the fact that a good deal of vigorous activity was ongoing prior to that. Are you seeing any effect on revenues?
Well, I think the marketing committee that was formed after a town meeting, that's still kind of getting their legs out from under them. So I don't think that committee has, maybe had, one meeting. So I don't think there's been a lot of, groundswell from that. So, there's normal revenue coming in from our services, but I don't think we've seen a large impact yet from marketing.
One more question.
Okay.
On the snow budget, what do you consider the midpoint of the season as a normal matter? I mean, when you're budgeting, I mean, is it, you're going to say March 31st, I'm sure.
Pass that mic to me.
Last week.
They usually say January is the snowiest month, but I don't know. I mean, typically, usually by this time, we're probably more than halfway through a snow season. So, I mean, this is a total anomaly this year, as we can see on the news. I mean, I had this conversation with the chair of the board about for FY16, should we up the snow and ice budget? And I thought not, only because it doesn't typically end up this way. But it certainly is an area of concern, and as many of you know, that, even though technically you can raise the snow and ice deficit on next year's tax rate, we have typically sought a way, when we had a snow and ice deficit, to absorb it in the bottom line of the budget, and that is still our goal. Senator Eldridge did come in my office this morning, or this afternoon, I should say, and he did mention that there's been some talk on Beacon Hill about some kind of supplemental appropriation to help cities and towns too. And because the governor declared a state of emergency, that's kind of one of the first triggers to go for federal too. So, there's a lot of things still happening. As Steve said, we haven't really seen any invoices nor the overtime payroll for this past storm to really see how bad off we are.
Steve, are you in hauling mode or at this point as opposed
Am I in
to
hauling
pushing
mode?
plow?
Well, we do haul snow up to the former landfill site is typically where we store it.
You do?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? I have one. If our year-to-date nursing revenue is 233, and that includes 165,000 in subsidy, then roughly the real revenue coming in is around 70,000. So annualized is 140. That's lower than we expected, I think.
Well, it is. We've been looking at some billing. There was a little hiccup in billing right before the end of the year, so Heather York is reviewing the billing. So we're sure hoping the revenue comes in higher than the 140 for the fiscal year. But again, we're working through a few billing issues as well.
All right, then, continue.
Thank you. So we're going to talk a little about where we're at with the town hall. Where we're at with the FY16 budget, and as many of you know, I think after 3 attempts, the Board of Selectmen finally approved a budget Thursday night after, I think, 2 cancellations. But in order to it's going to be a little hard to talk about the Selectmen's actions on Thursday night without maybe preempting a little bit of the ALG discussion, because it was
Go right ahead.
triggered around that. Correct, thank you. But as those of you will recall, that back on December 15th, I presented a recommended budget to the Board of Selectmen for FY16 total spending, which includes not only operational but capital budget and excuse me, general fund subsidies to some of the enterprise funds that totaled $32,176,851. We view this as a level service budget, and it equated to a 2.32% increase from FY15. Oops. Now, as I mentioned, we did have an ALG meeting on Thursday morning, followed that evening by a Board of Selectmen's meeting, and under the charter, the Selectmen must transmit a recommended budget to the FinCom 60 days prior to town meeting, which is probably the closest we've ever cut that, the board voting on February 5th. But at the ALG meeting on Thursday morning, the 5th, we had a lot of discussion about the amount of money that would be recaptured if we levied to the full 2.5%, and that was, I think, to the tune of $985,000. Obviously had a lot of discussion, and Mr. Noon was very articulate in terms of the FinCom's position on those things. But what was arrived at, I guess you would call, is a compromise, in that the 2 entities, the town and the schools, were asked to cut $585,000. So in essence, recapturing about $400,000 of that impact of 2.5, as opposed to the full 985. So the town share at 37.9% of the budget equated to $222,000. So I made some recommendations to the Board of Selectmen last Thursday as to what I would recommend if 222,000 were to be cut from the budget that I presented back on December 15 and the budget you all reviewed on Budget Saturday on January 10th. And one of the recommendations was something I was thinking about anyways, kind of before the ALG meeting. But the 222,000 included a cut of 131,000 by combining the Director of Land Use Management and the Economic Development Director together. And one of the reasons, or several reasons why I recommended that. One is having gone to the Mass Municipal Association annual meeting about 3 weeks ago, it seems to be that is a new trend in terms of land use management and economic development. And when you think about it, and I know some of you may recall, but when we originally talked about the Land Use Management Department, one of the primary reasons was to streamline permitting, to make things happen quicker, which is good for the economy, good for business, good for our residents. So, and that was one of the impetuses behind that. Secondly, and I think someone raised this on Budget Saturday, is do we really need, we have professionals that are in charge of all the different components of land use. Do we really need somebody overseeing that? And my view is, well, you need somebody to kind of look at the big picture, make sure that everybody's kind of pulling the oars in the same direction, but not necessarily micromanaging. And this person could use, therefore, the economic development skills to really try to make a difference in the community and serve as an ombudsperson, et cetera, when businesses need some help in town. And, I guess, once again, I kind of viewed it as this position really being focused on economic development, not only by reaching out to businesses, but helping streamline processes. So, we eliminated one of those two positions, which equated to 131,000. Also, as you recall, since we budget the so-called OPEB factor for new positions, eliminating one of the positions equated to removing $12,000 in the budget of an OPEB factor. Because it seemed like the original recommendation on OPEB was $1.4 million between the two entities, and it appeared based on school budgeting, et cetera, that it looked like $1.2 million was going to be the number for OPEB from the two entities. We budgeted, or my recommendation for a cut was 37.9% of $1.2 million, which was a reduction of 78,000 from 532,000 to, well, I can't do the math in my head, 400 and something. And finally, removing $13,000 of subsidy to the ambulance enterprise fund, since we're going to be delayed really till FY17 in terms of implementation of advanced life support. So on last Thursday evening, the Board of Selectmen voted to recommend a package of $31,954,851, endorsing all those cuts that we just walked through, which equates to a new budget, which is 1.62% increase over FY15. So when you look at the total, our operational budget is $31,258,112. The subsidies to enterprise funds, $328,439, and the capital, $368,300, to once again the total of $31,954,851. And just to refresh you, the general fund subsidies are $164,439 to the transportation enterprise fund, $162,000 to ambulance, and $2,000 to the cultural council, for once again a total of $328,439. The capital includes painting town hall at $150,000, the fixed route shuttle for $130,000, which Doug will talk about in a bit, a truck replacement, F-550 truck replacement for $55,800, and improvements to the cemetery building for accessibility at $32,500, and that's 50% of the cost. We have a commitment from the cemetery commissioners to pay the other 50%. So total capital is $368,300, even though this says subsidies. And finally, as I think this board is aware, because we did talk about it on Budget Saturday, and it's still an issue in evolution, is the issue of the FY16 Middlesex Retirement System assessment. You will remember that when we received our Middlesex retirement assessment, it was up over $600,000 more than we had budgeted. Some of it was because it appeared we were being assessed for some former APS employees that have moved over to the region. There were also some misclassification of some public safety employees who were treated as what we would call Group 1 employees, kind of the regular employees, versus Group 4, which is public safety, and I think there were about 20 of those. It looks like, and correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, because Steve has been working with the school finance folks on this, that there were 21 school people that should have been, is it? 20 or 21 that should have been on the AB assessment. All that data has been submitted to the Middlesex Retirement System. It's been given to their actuaries, Siegel and Company, and it's our understanding that Siegel is analyzing this and will be coming presumably back with a recommendation for a new assessment. More problematic is the issue of the public safety employees. We have about 20 of those, and what is very odd about this, that somewhere around 2011, some of these folks were switched to Group 1 from Group 4, and these are not like new employees. They are, a lot of these people are over 10 years service to the town. We have looked at our records, the electronic transfers that are sent to Middlesex. Everybody was classified correctly. Somewhere along the line, people were misclassified. We have given that information to Town Council. We're going to be talking to Town Council next week about what our next step should be. It appears to us that if there was an error, it was not an error on our part. It was on the retirement system, and hopefully we can discuss how they can make some amends as to that situation. But if in fact we have to absorb some of these additional funds, it's our goal to absorb it within the $31,954,000 by maybe perhaps making some other cuts and some other adjustments. So position with the Board of Selectmen is $31,954,851 is kind of our bottom line, and if we have to absorb any, hopefully none, of the Middlesex retirement, we would do that within that allocation. And that kind of concludes how we got to where we're at right now.
All right, so just let me clarify it. What you're saying is if the Middlesex number goes higher than what you have, that you'll find a way to cover it within the operating budget that you've proposed.
Correct. We put all our departments through a drill of 1.5% cut, and what they would cut if we had to absorb the full $600,000. So we have that kind of a list to look at and prioritize if in fact we have to absorb that.
And the same for the snow and ice deficit if it continues to snow?
Well, that would be an FY15. That would be an FY15 adjustment.
All right.
Yes.
And your budget assumes local option meals tax revenue of?
Correct. That revenue, you may recall, is in the ALG spreadsheet as a revenue.
And that is it still pegged to the economic development officer, the fixtures?
I would say at this point it's probably more pegged to the fixed route because of the way we've combined those two positions.
Okay.
I didn't hear the answer. Say again.
Which question? Okay. I would say it is pegged to the transportation piece only and not to the position.
All right. Questions? Bill?
Just to clarify, so the amount of the Middlesex retirement item is $600,000. Are you talking about absorbing the increment above that, or is the full $600,000 not currently included in your $31,954,851?
That is the incremental cost based on their preliminary assessment, so that's worst-case scenario.
The 600,000 is the incremental cost?
Yes.
And so that's, okay, so if they come back and say you have to pay $600,000, you're going to maintain it within the $31,954,851?
Correct.
Okay. The 37.9%, so basically 40-60% split, what is the denominator on that?
The denominator on that is the total, basically based on last year's budget, the split between the town and the school and last year's budget.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. Steve, is this a revised ALG plan, or is this the?
It's the most recent, but it doesn't reflect the cuts that these guys have made.
Okay. So when we look at the amount of reserves on this of 2.6 million, is this, what should that number be if the cuts were?
If all the cuts were made, then it would still, it would work out to, I think, to about 2.4 million or so.
Okay.
I think 2.4.
What is your current position on stabilization?
Well, as you recall, that part of my budget presentation was to put $2 million in stabilization out of our roughly $10 million of reserves. So that is something, actually, the selectmen and I have not discussed since the budget presentation wasn't really part of this budget vote they did the other night, so need to have further dialogue as to how they feel about that.
Yeah, I, for one, just see those as part of the same, just because it comes to the amount of reserves that we're going to be using. So I think it's essential that we determine that at the same time we determine the rest of the ALG plan. Excuse me. So I know that kind of throws a monkey wrench in a little bit, but because it simply is, it's so dramatic a use, and I could get comfortable at one level of reserves, but if it all of a sudden says plus $2 million, then that's a different circumstance.
Understood.
So the selectmen have, so once again, that none of this plan. What is the current plan again then on the stabilization? It's just the same as it was?
It was the same as it was that we talked on Budget Saturday about, yes.
So the plan effectively then would be to be $4.6 million of reserve use?
Correct, although one could probably argue that stabilization is still a reserve, but.
Right. Yeah, I mean, yeah, right, absolutely. Okay, thank you.
Mary Ann?
Could I ask a question about the ALG agreement?
Sure.
Can somebody explain how we went from whatever it was last time, 600 and something as the untaxed capacity, to 985 this month? What changed?
Someone named Brian McMullen could probably explain it better, but we'll have to try Steve Barrett, because
When we balanced the year, Mary Ann, we had excess revenues, so we put some more money towards the untaxed levy piece. It's that simple, really. We had a good year in 14, and the way the state works the recap, there was an opportunity to put some more money into untaxed levy capacity, and again, we made that change. We can get, Brian wasn't able to make it here tonight because he has the flu. He can talk with you at the next meeting more. Yeah, he really wanted to be here. I told him, see you soon. So, but he can report to the FinCom a little bit more on that if you'd like. But what I can tell you is our revenues were strong, and we had an opportunity to put more towards the untaxed levy capacity.
another question?
Yeah, well, just now circling back to the municipal budget, I'm sorry, that's what we're supposed to be talking about. Have you, I know that the selectmen have been challenged with their meetings, but have they elicited public feedback about both some of the priorities that are in this budget as well as about the meals tax? And if they have not, when is that going to happen?
They have not, and I can't answer the second part. I have not talked to the chair about that.
Herman?
Mary Ann just touched upon the question I had. I thought the meals, the position of, that we're now talking about, the combined position, was pegged to the meals tax. So you're saying that, is that a change?
Well, it is a change because, if you recall, we had two new positions that were in the budget. It was land use director and economic development. We've combined the two. So I guess my view is that because of the combined piece, and I really feel strongly about the land use component, that I don't think it necessarily should be tied to the meals tax.
All right, Doug?
Yeah, help me with some numbers on this.
Mike?
Mike, okay, thank you. I'm just sort of looking at the total numbers. 32 million rounded is the budget. The rule of thumb that we've used in the past is that personnel costs are 70%. So just doing some doodling, I said, okay, then that's around 20 million. If you had an increase in your personnel expenses over the course of the year of 3%, then that would mean that the budget contains already a $600,000 bump attributable to just paying everybody their increases and increases in costs for personnel. Does that make sense?
Right, but it might not be quite as simple as that, but yes.
Okay, no, I mean, obviously this is, I'm taking a medex to it here, but my point is that the budget looks awfully good. I mean, you've got a 1.62% increase over the prior year, but in this year's budget is a built-in increase already for people costs of $600,000.
Yeah, the only exception would be, Doug, that we have 4 contracts that are up the end of this fiscal year. This does not include any settlements in there.
Okay. The numbers with that, when you take that 600,000, put it into the pot, and then say, so you only increased by 1.6%? With all these things that we did, including adding the combined position, land use and ED and so on, the budget looks very good. So,
Yeah, I guess if there's anything to be concerned about, it would be on the capital side. Mm-hmm. And as I reported, we have solicited bids to look, do a whole facility study in terms of our infrastructure for our buildings. We'll be getting that report probably April-ish, maybe May, because that will definitely probably have an impact as we move forward in capital planning, on the out years.
When Superintendent Brand was here, he indicated that last time that his study is going to run around $200,000. He has 8 facilities, which are substantial in size, of course. What is the anticipated cost for the town to do our study?
About $80,000 to $85,000.
That's great. Okay. Well, my compliments. The budget looks terrific. Thank you.
Bob?
The Middlesex payments, whatever they come out to be, cover normal costs plus some of the money for people who are currently retired that are not covered adequately by the pension fund? And do you know what percentage they've gotten up to?
My understanding, and Steve can, since Steve sits on, all the treasurers sit on the retirement, or the advisory board, I guess, is of the assessment, about 2/3 of it is kind of the future funding or funding the unfunded liability, and then 1/3 is kind of paying the ongoing expenses of the existing retirees. You would know better than I.
Bob, can I get so out of the assessment, as Steve says, about, $500,000 or $600,000 is for the retirees, the other $1.8 million or million, that amount is for the pay-as-you-go or the actuarial folks, the people that haven't retired yet. Are you looking for a funding update for Middlesex in total, or you just...
Someday I wouldn't mind seeing it. You don't have to have it tonight.
Yeah, I can get that for you. I know they've stretched the pension out to 2035, I think, or 2040. So I will get you that funding ratio. I think it's in some of the data we put out.
But when Steve says they have pushed it out to 2040, it's the state legislature that pushed it out, not Middlesex. It's when we're having some hard times a few years ago, I think the governor initiated pushing the funding issue out further.
Margaret?
Hi, Steve's. So, just a couple of questions. One is, Steve Ledoux, when you were talking about the Middlesex retirement issue in terms of our uncertainty of not knowing what our liability will be, you mentioned something about how they might make some kind of amends since it was their error and not our error. So I'm just curious, like...
I'm just saying that is what I like to see them do.
Yeah. Well, I'm just wondering, is
Wishful
that...
thinking on my part, perhaps?
Yeah, is that realistic? I mean, I'm hoping it is, but...
That's why we've involved council.
Yeah. Okay, so I see, you're taking it to the council, I got it. Okay, and then just on the combined economic development director and land use director, it seems like when you were just describing that a minute ago, you seem to imply that maybe more of that would be economic development. I'm just curious, are you thinking 50-50? What are you thinking?
I mean, obviously, a lot of it would depend on the skills of the person we would find to fill that, but I'm kind of leaning towards probably more 60-40 economic development. I mean, I think that, you know, we have professional people. The big goal is to make sure everybody's pulling on the same page, that our permit tracking software that's going to come live July 1 is everybody is using that to its fullest and things like that. And, you know, it's more like my friend here on my right is finance director, where, you know, he's got 3 or 4 other, you know, department heads under him. You know, he doesn't micromanage them, but he makes sure everybody's pulling together and is all on the same page. And that's, you know, and I don't think, you know, the land use director, you know, given the level of professionalism, may need to, you know, drill down and be a micromanager and can, you know, spend more time on economic development.
It sounds like the land use, you know, that skill will be more of a management piece, and the other one is being more proactive and getting out and making
Correct.
things happen. And
Correct. Really being the face of land use and the face of economic development. Correct.
thank you.
Mike?
Yeah, Steve and Steve, this budget looks pretty impressive. It looks like you took the spirit of ALG to heart and sharpened your pencils and got in the spirit of things. Now we're just waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Out there, actually.
Right. So I think it looks pretty good. Is there any feel for, like, when you would have any different feedback on state aid with the new governor? And
Well, I think, as the board knows, because he's a new governor, he gets a little extra time to put his budget together. I don't know when that's going to happen. He was one of the keynote speakers at the Mass Municipal Association meeting a few weeks ago. You know, he really talked about a state municipal partnership, that he would not do anything to harm cities and towns. Certainly didn't promise any added revenue, but, you know, his view is that if cuts have to be made, he would avoid doing them to local aid and things like that. But I have no clue what the prognosis would be for what he's going to recommend at this point for 16.
yeah, I also think it makes sense to sort of combine, at least initially, combine the role of the land use czar and economic development director. Too bad we can't import some old like Civil War era mill buildings into Acton and give some kind of incentive and character to Acton's rebirth. But it looks good. Thank you, Steve and Steve.
Thank you.
Before we get too carried away in complimenting these guys, there are a few things that work the other way. I think we got a little bit lower debt service going into FY16. I think there's $250,000 that will pay for a full reassessment of all the property in town in 15 that we won't have in 16. So there's a little bit of stuff going the other way. But all in all, I do appreciate the fact that you guys have put together a pretty close to level service budget. And it's certainly a year when we need one.
Mr. Chairman, question?
Yes, Bill.
May I ask another one? This seems shockingly good.
I don't know if that's a compliment or not, Mr. Mullin.
The schools are coming up next, Bill. Don't worry about it.
I'm just perplexed. If you take 31,258, is that the number? Which is currently the operating budget, and you subtract out the 165,000 that's now included in there for the last year's nursing service, and the 50,000 that was in 14 is no longer there in 15 for council on aging, and now that's all rolled into there's no, and you take that out, and then you take out the amount of the OPEB that was in the operating budget of 674,000, which was separate and now is in the operating budget. And you take out the 140,000 that was for the land use director that wasn't in the operating budget but is in the operating budget. You have a 0.59% increase in your operating budget. How is that possible with salary increases, with no other layoffs?
So, Bill, the percentages described on the bottom of the slides are total spending, municipal operating budget, capital subsidies plus OPEB. The FY15 operating budget was $30,049,000. The 16 budget is $31,258,000. So it is up, it is up about 4%, the operating budget.
My point is, if you take out those things, it's 0.05.
Well, I'd have to walk through those things. It's not something I can do live.
Yeah, because just an example, Bill, is that even though we had OPEB in a separate article last year, we still consider that part of our full allocation of budget. So it wasn't like we're absorbing it. We always counted it last year as well as part of our pool.
I mean, the math is pretty straightforward. It's on that slide, this slide we have in our packet, and I just am surprised that if there are no changes in personnel to have essentially a zero increase in the operating budget, it's just surprising to me. So maybe it's some of those things that we talked about, that Steve just talked about, but I'll have to think about it. Thanks.
All right, should we bring in Mr. Haley?
Good evening.
Good evening, Doug.
I'm here tonight to talk about one of the major initiatives that the FY15 budget is going to be addressing, and that's in regards to a fixed-route shuttle. There are many different studies and plans that have indicated that transportation is a significant issue for the people in Acton. The Acton 2020 Objective 3.2 stated that we should provide and encourage public transportation. The Town Manager's Strategic Plan, Goal 6, Objective B, provide more opportunities for public transportation. The Board of Selectmen's 2014 goals, short-term rail shuttle connections, northeast Acton, long-term develop a fixed-route shuttle service. It's a bad position for me to make sure I've got the right slides up. 2013, the Acton Town Survey, UMass Lowell, at 31%, transportation was the lowest rated town service. 35% of the population felt transportation services were poor. The 2010 Project Hope survey indicated that people wanted to provide a shuttle service around town and an increased shuttle service to the train. As we looked at trying to address this issue, we were fortunate in watching a similar shuttle being developed in Westboro. This service began on Monday, December 2nd, 2013. It provides service at 3 distinct types, a commuter route, a downtown commuter route, and a local route on weekdays only. Fares for these shuttles are $1.50 for full fare, 75 cents for half fare, and cash can be paid on the vehicle. This is a map showing what their route looks like. The red in the map is where the commuter portion is, and the blue is where the local routes are provided. We hope to have a similar type of action with the route that we developed. This shows the increase in ridership from December 2013 to September of 2014. In just 1 year, they had a 10-fold increase in ridership, and that is still increasing. We anticipate that our ridership should be very similar to what theirs was. Talking to Transaction Associates, we came up with 2 different options. Option 1, with a budget of $130,000, approximately a 13-mile loop, days of service Monday through Friday, 8 hours a day, 260 days a year, with an 18-passenger accessible Glavo bus with GPS and Wi-Fi. Option 2 was a slightly larger budget of $144,000, and the only change was to have a 23-passenger bus. We felt that just initiating this service, we would go with the smaller bus and have a less cost. We also looked at possibly extending the hours to 2 additional hours if we provide the fuel for the vehicle rather than transaction. Both Transaction Associates and our Transportation Advisory Committee has looked at the variety of different locations where we could have stops. They include a lot of different businesses, and they include a lot of the larger residential complexes that we have along Great Road and in the centers. As we develop the route, we will be looking at having stops at these locations. This is a map that basically shows what we anticipate the route might look like. It would start up by Avalon, coming down Great Road, all the way to East Acton, run down Weatherby Street, go a short distance up Route 2 to Kelly's Corner. From Kelly's Corner, go to West Acton Center. From West Acton Center down to South Acton Center, and then all the way up Main Street back again to Great Road and back to Avalon, and continue to do that loop. Approximately an hour would be the time in which that loop would be required. And that's essentially the project as we now know it. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
So the funding for this would be in a transportation enterprise fund?
Initially, it will be an article, and it is tied to the adoption of the meals tax.
Okay.
If it is approved, then in future years, it would be within the enterprise fund.
All right. So, questions? Bob?
The Westford ridership did not specify a time span. Is that a day, a week, a month, a year? What was it?
The number of riders
Yes.
per month it was.
Pardon?
Per month.
Per month?
Yeah.
So 264 riders a month?
Yeah.
Okay.
490 was the
Wow.
final total.
All right.
And it's only a 1 year old. and
No, I
still-
understand. I just wanted to know what it was. And do you have expectation of ridership for this $130,000 vehicle?
My expectation is that within a year, we would have similar numbers as Westboro.
Okay, similar. And that turns out to be a subsidy from the town of how much per rider? Did you do that, or, I mean, it's easy enough to do.
I could do that, but not
you
at
haven't
this
done it.
moment,
Okay.
yes.
Fine. Is there some expectation of an appropriate subsidy level? If you don't, I mean, you might need more the first year, you might need more the second year, but in the long run, is there some level of subsidy that is envisioned?
Generally, on the door-to-door services that we currently provide, we're running between $20 to $25 per rider. As you have a more fixed route, your expectation is you start dropping that number because you're more likely to have more riders on the trip.
Can you repeat that, Doug?
Sure. Right now, with our door-to-door transport, we have a cost of about $20 to $25 per rider. As you have a fixed route, you anticipate to have more riders on the trips, and that cost should start going down.
But the MBTA subsidizes about $2.64 a rider. So we don't envision ever getting there, but do we get anywhere near there in 2 or 3 years? Probably not.
Probably not, and with, we don't have the population base that the MBTA has to support their service.
Okay.
We have people with needs, but not the population base that's going to use the service as much as you would in the city.
I understand that, but Brockton runs its own buses, Westboro now runs its own buses. Do we have any insight as to what subsidy levels these other towns are paying?
And the Westboro service, with the number of people that they currently have, is very similar to the service that we're proposing. So we would be in the same category that they're currently providing.
But you don't have data about these other services, other towns in the city, in the state, which provide their own bus service, have a subsidy level, and we don't at this moment. I mean, it's easy enough.
Right,
You can
right.
find it out, I know
I can-
that.
yeah,
but-
yeah.
But you don't have it at the moment.
No, no.
Someday it would be nice to see it.
Sure.
Maybe not even before town meeting, but just
Yep.
in the course of time. Thank you, Doug.
You're welcome.
Margaret? Stop typing, Margaret, and ask questions.
Thank you for that. So I am wondering, who is sort of the target market for this service?
Our target market will be basically 3 different categories.
Okay.
One would be residents that wish to go to the different shops along the routes. One would be workers who wish to get to those shops to get to their jobs. And the third would be commuters that would be going to the train station.
So it's not necessarily school kids?
School kids would definitely be part of it. In the summer, we may divert that route so that it includes Nara. We will we will have a route that's dependent upon the needs in the season that we're in.
And the hours you were going to do it was an 8-hour, is that like 9 to 5, or what is that?
We haven't quite figured that out because clearly we want to have some access to the train station, so we want to have some times that are comparable for people to get there. But we have conflicting needs. Do we make sure that we operate during the lunch hour so that people can get to lunch? Do we try to cover mornings? Do we try to cover afternoons? Do we have breaks in between? Those are all those things that we'll figure out as we put the service in.
And with those target market, those 3 groups that you talked about, are those that you have sort of gathered data about, or is it just sort of a best guess in terms of who would actually use the service?
It is somewhat of a guess, but it's based on the use of Dollar Ride, the use of the rail shuttle, and the use of the Roadrunner. We're seeing more and more of the locations that they're requesting to go are within the route that we're developing.
Okay. And sort of following up on some of Bob's comments, do we have any benchmarks for this program in terms of, you know, if we don't get to X ridership in 5 years, you know what, it's just not something people want or use, or is there anything like that, or is it just going to, no matter what happened, and we just keep going with it?
I'm not sure there is a benchmark like that, but I don't believe there's anything that we do in government that we say we're just going to keep on doing it no matter what. Clearly, this is the responsibility of the Board of Selectmen, and for them to make an assessment each year as whether or not this service is a needed service in the community.
Okay. And then finally, I think I asked this at Budget Saturday, but you are going to keep going with the dial-a-ride, the door-to-door
Correct.
service?
Yes.
But you don't have any fear that that'll cannibalize this fixed route?
It's possible that we might see a change over time, that we might see more people using the fixed route bus, and the need for those other vans might lessen. I don't think so, because my experience is as we put a new van in line, it quickly gets filled up for the day, and I haven't seen a lessening of that demand yet.
Thank you.
Mike?
Yeah, that's a great idea. We're talking one bus, one route.
Correct.
So we start at the beginning, go to the end, turn around, go back the other way.
Correct, exactly.
Since this makes stops at strategic commercial properties, it sounds like once you get your economic development director on board with his land use hat and his marketing hat, sounds like an ideal opportunity for corporate sponsorship as well. Donlands and TJ Maxx and Acton Medical, they could all pitch in since we're doing them a service as well. What clever name have you assigned to this bus?
Maybe we'll have a prize for the best name.
It sounds like a good idea, and I think definitely with the parking, especially the benefit to especially the elderly shoppers that you don't want driving. Give them access to shopping and so on, and commuters that. As a user of the South Acton train station, not so much these days, but parking is not enough. At least not enough for Acton residents, and so that's definitely a need there. And I think it would have to be timed to coincide with the train schedule as well, obviously. So I think definitely there is a need for that kind of service, probably long overdue, and I wish it a lot of success. I think it's a good, the timing is right, the price is certainly right, and it's, lots of good things can come out of this, so it's a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you.
Doug?
Hi, Doug. My compliments. This looks good. Let me just check some of the numbers out as I was jotting them down. I'm not sure I got them right. The cost of this program is $125, is that right?
$130,000.
$135, okay, my numbers will be off a little bit then. And the Westford number at the end of that year was about $500 per month, right?
Yeah, correct.
Okay, so and their program had only been going for a year, right?
Excuse me?
Their program had only been going for a year.
That's correct. It only
Okay.
been for a year. Yeah.
So if we were to say, okay, let's look at a stabilized year out in the future, instead of trying to tie benchmarks or anything else to this thing in its first infant year of performance, and say that we would do perhaps 20% better than Westford does in its first year when we reach our stabilized year, which could be several years out.
Yeah.
Okay? And if we assume that that number is 600 a month, that would be 7,200 people per year.
Yeah.
I used 125 for the budget, so I'm off by 10. But that would indicate that the per capita cost to the town is about $17 a ride.
Yeah.
I would note that comparing that to what a cab costs, if you've ever tried to get a cab in Acton, it's quite an experience. Maybe Uber can do better, but I doubt it. But it was frustrating. You couldn't get anybody to come, and then and so it was expensive, it was inefficient, and it was unreliable. This sounds like a significant improvement. As you know, I support these things. I think that in the case of Acton, The numbers are so thin that it's very difficult to get real solid results in the early going. And so one of the things I would urge that we do is to follow up on what my colleague has said, is that at one point in my career, I had responsibility for 685,000 square feet of office space located in Acton. And if you had come to my door and said, we're going to run a transportation system, and you have all these buildings that need support, we'd like you to kick something in. I've seen the numbers that are coming in from IBM and others in Littleton, and they're peanuts. If somebody had come to me and said, put in 5,000 or 10,000, I really would have given it very serious thought, and I don't think I'm the only landlord who would have done that. There are numerous other landlords in Acton who will benefit from this. The existence of this transportation route is a sales point, and our market is deeply depressed for office space.
Yeah.
So it's a marketing tool for them. They become our partners, and I would urge you to try and seek that private sector buy-in. It certainly could, I think, relieve 25% of the cost of this program.
It's certainly going to be one of my goals. As you know, with Crosstown Connect, we were able to reach out to 5 of the businesses that have joined Crosstown Connect. I believe that we have the wherewithal to convince some of our local business owners to join this project too.
I'm emphasizing office space, Doug, because I think that their population, it's like the tide. I mean, they're all in the morning, they're all out in the afternoon,
Yep.
And that's where their needs are, is during those 2 narrow blocks of time each day. And so if you're able to talk about how you address that and helping their people get in and get out, I think that's going to be very persuasive. So best of luck. Thank you.
Armin.
Probably this was covered, and I just didn't hear it right, but what do you expect to charge a given rider as he or she gets on the bus?
We'll probably be in the similar range as Westboro, $1.50.
Okay, so it'll be $1.50 a ride, and we're subsidizing, if I just understood what Doug said, roughly $17 a ride?
Right.
So the total is about $20 a ride, thereabouts?
I think an initial expectation of having your revenue to be about 10 or 15% of what your cost from fees, that's probably what you're going to get. And you hope to build on that as time goes on.
Mary Ann?
That's misleading. That's misleading. The first year cost is 125, right?
Excuse me, 130.
35, you said that.
So you just keep on trying to reduce
I know,
it.
I love the number, Okay, and so, but what I'm just addressing is the stabilized year, okay? Yeah, when your ridership is at 7,200, and so your $1.50 and any other fees that you're charging to get on and off the bus is a bigger chunk by a long shot of the revenues. So it's not the 120 or 35 as envisioned in the very low beginning. It's a larger number. It's much better.
Moving on. Bill.
What is the total cost for transportation in this budget?
Currently, I think the enterprise fund, it's $380,000, I believe, Bill, and this will be another $130,000.
Okay. 130 and what was the other number?
$380,000. And
510. So $500,000 is what we'll be spending on
correct.
transportation.
Yeah.
Tourism.
I won't forget it.
I presume that non-Acton residents can also ride this bus? Non-Acton residents could also ride this bus?
Non-Acton residents riding within Acton would ride this
Right.
bus, yes.
So tourism is, it's one of those things that I've been trying to focus on for a long period of time. So during the summer, for example, you could have a pickup place at Morrison Farm that's going to take us to Acton Center.
I was about to say that.
To the Acton.
Yeah, duck boats. Yeah.
Let's head for the museums.
All right. Thank you, Doug. Mr. Manager, if you give me some idea when we're going to see a draft warrant or a list of articles, I would appreciate it.
Our goal is to have one for the BOS meeting on the I've lost all track of my days, I'm sorry, 23rd, I believe. There are a few moving parts in terms of some land issues that are going on right now.
And if you could, would you provide copies of these presentations to the committee? Thank you. Thank you for coming. The Chair of the Board of Selectmen has risen.
Good evening. Good evening. I just, one thing that nobody talked about in the transportation thing that was kind of a driving force behind this is that if we have an 18-seat bus that takes people from Avalon down to the train station each morning, that's 18 cars off the road. And one of the things that was identified with Acton 2020 was traffic congestion is a problem. So every bus that we have that takes people around is one less car that is getting out there, and I don't want that to get lost. That's aspect of it, not just the financial aspect. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. All right, moving on. We'll now hear from the Acton Boxborough Regional School District. And it looks like the chair and the superintendent are coming up. It looks like 3.
Dennis?
For benefit of the vast television audience that follows us faithfully, we have Dennis Bruce, Vice Chair, Dr. Glenn Brand, Superintendent, Ms. Claire Janot, Finance Director, and Christina Richlick, Chair of the Acton Boxborough Regional School Committee. It's all yours.
Great. Thank you very much for having us tonight. I'll start by way of introduction and then turn it over to Glenn and Claire and Dennis. I'd like to just begin with some recent background. Many of you attended the school's budget Saturday on January 31st, and while at that time we did vote 9-2 to approve our preliminary budget, you should also note that we asked the administration to put together a list of possible cuts should we need to lower our budget. They did a great job at a difficult task and put together a list for us divided into levels 1 and 2, which you'll hear more about tonight. Acton Leadership Group then met last Thursday morning, which we also heard about. Central to that consensus that was decided upon was the schools working to bring our budget in line with what the ALG plan tells us Acton would be comfortable paying. Later that day, the schools had our open budget hearing Thursday night. At that time, we did bring the feedback from ALG to the school committee and had a long discussion about the potential cuts I just described. However, I would like you to know that that was the first time that our full committee had seen that list of potential cuts. So it became clear as part of that discussion that we needed more time to sort of digest the need for and the specifics of various cuts. It doesn't mean that we ignored what we heard at ALG that morning. It just meant that we weren't ready to take action by vote that night. So in lieu of voting any cuts, we did vote on our same budget from Budget Saturday in addition to the revenue sources and assessments. And I lastly wanted to let you know we did schedule an additional school committee meeting for tomorrow night for a Thursday. I'm sorry. What day is it with all the snow days? Thursday night, we have scheduled an additional school committee meeting for a budget discussion and possible vote. And to that meeting, we plan to bring feedback that we hear from you tonight. So thank you for having us.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to be here to provide members with insight in terms of the FY16 budget is currently shaping up. As Christina mentioned, I certainly am well aware that many, if not all, of the members of the committee here have had the opportunity to follow this unfolding story. And so it's with that I'm aware that you have a more full packet in front of you. The intention tonight is to try and quickly move through some of these slides. Many of these have been included as part of the presentation to this point in time on a number of different occasions, but I think that their inclusion here speaks to the importance of building what is before you and is shaping up to be the current FY16 budget. Again, taking us back a number of months, the process that has began with the administrative team throughout the district has focused in on a number of areas, of which I spoke to at Budget Saturday. As is the case, I'm sure, with any budget within the town, we have a number of fixed costs and obligations that we really build the budget from and consider our requirements around legal mandates, employee benefits, which is a theme certainly that has been spoken to and we'll come back to again in a couple of moments. Looking to also, the fourth bullet is one that I know has, and as any community that I've ever been in, been a focus of conversation and concern, and that is the costs that are associated with special education programming. And it's important to note, I think, continuously the efforts of the district administration to try and provide, where and when possible, programming for students within district. That being said, a district the size of ours, certainly one, though, that's in terms of the onus of responsibility shared for other districts, it's a rising cost and it's a cost of concern, and we keep our focus and attention on that area. Finally, we consider the enrollment and the sections, and that plays itself out with a couple of proposed reductions that I'll speak to in a couple of moments. A couple of other themes that have been included as part of this budget discussion, a focus in on technology. This is not new. This is not something that's unique, as I've come to learn. An awful lot of great work over the years in terms of trying to expand and improve constantly and attend to the technology necessary to support teaching and learning, but it's one that continues to be a cornerstone of this budget in terms of the focus on trying to continue to build out our technology. It's also, at the end of this conversation, a focus where right now is emerging proposals in terms of trying to trim or control our costs, and I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end around reductions. The final bullet on this slide is one that I also speak to, and it's one that I spoke to at a little bit more length on Budget Saturday, and members of the school committee have heard, as well as the community have heard this, and that is a priority around trying to attend to our infrastructure, our facilities and maintenance, and that is captured through a line around a study, a project that was mentioned earlier that I think is going to be certainly important as we think about maintaining our buildings and moving forward. Budget priorities have been central to building the budget. I won't go into any great length here this evening unless there are questions from members of the committee, but these back in December served as a centerpiece in terms of trying to establish budget priorities, and these are captured within the FY16 budget, specifically around some of the requests that have emerged in terms of some personnel requests, which are captured or highlighted thematically, if you will, in terms of the last bullet there. It is as well, I would suggest, an important piece to mention, and that's captured within the next slide around enrollment. One of the things that I have come to certainly learn over the last 6-7 months being here in the district is a great area of focus around the drop in enrollment and the decline in enrollment that as a district we are projected to experience, and in fact that's playing itself out. At the same time, we draw your attention and members of the community's attention to the fact that while this enrollment drop is taking place, there are needs that continue to emerge in terms of the administration and the faculty and staff contending with what is a growing need amongst a large percentage of our student population. So as it stands right now, the FY16 budget that is before you and that was before the committee is captured on this slide. The FY16 budget is $80,197,455. That reflects a change of 4.89% over and above the FY15 budget. The next slide that's in your packet and that's on the screen here captures in greater detail in a comparative sense The variations from FY15 to FY16. Included here is the FY15 voted assessments for both Acton and Boxborough as it relates to the total budget and the increase respectively you can see there. I draw your attention to the latter part of this slide. A lot of numbers I know packed in here, but the intention here was to try and model or showcase, if you will, the variations with Middlesex that we have spoken about in Clare at some length in a number of committee, in a number of school committee meetings before. All told, down the bottom of this screen, when those things are considered, this reflects the, right now, with the current budget as it stands, a 6.9% increase in the assessment for Acton and 5.0% increase for Boxborough. The next slide in your packet, in the slide pack, provides some greater insight in terms of one of the important pieces of this budget story, if you will, and that is funding sources. That the funding sources are certainly putting pressure on the budget, and that is captured through a number of areas. E&D, which I'll, another slide in just a moment, provide you with a little bit greater detail in terms of some of the changes over time and what the plans are as we think about building for FY16. Middlesex retirement, again, some more information in just a moment. As we think about funding sources from Chapter 70, the consideration right now from the administration is that relatively flat. Regional bonus aid, I know that people are aware of that. We will continue to receive funding in that area, but that is dropping as a percentage up to 20% each year. E&D right now, the proposal that's included in this budget is for total use of E&D of $200,000. That's down from $500,000, of which initially FY15's budget was built around. Regional transportation, we are forecasting to be at 65%, and that's the pre-9C cut levels that have been focused on. The budget history is captured on the next slide here, and you can see on the far right-hand side the percentage of budget increase over time going back to FY10. The FY14 number, one I'm sure that members of the committee are well aware of, has been defined or identified as the constructed budget going into regionalization, and that changes the look, if you will, of this grid. I mentioned just a moment ago around plans for E&D, and this has been some area of focus and an opportunity for me to learn a lot more around where both the history has sat as it relates to E&D, where we ideally would like to try and go and build as a district and a larger regional district. You can see the changes, and obviously with the budget increasing over time as a result of full regionalization, that has allowed for greater capacity, if you will, for what we can include as part of E&D, but the number is dropping as an overall percentage. Turn back history on the next slide. I apologize, a lot of numbers here, and I know that they're somewhat small to see on this last slide. Hopefully a little bit more legible within your packet. This slide tries to provide or captures the turn-back history over time back to FY05 for both both ABRSD, APS, as well as the Blanchard School in Boxborough. So, when you break down this budget as a whole, draw your attention to a couple of things that currently are important to note as part of the 4.89% increase. As the slide showcases here, of that 4.89%, there are a number of key areas that are embedded for or amount to that increase. 2.6% in salaries. 1.7% combined OPEB, Middlesex, and health insurance. 0.3% in special education tuitions and transportation, and 0.25 as part of capital specific to that proposed capital study that I mentioned earlier. Some other background that tries to put into context this budget request. You can see on this slide the OPEB history over time and the increased pressure if you will, on the total operating budget beginning back in FY13. Health insurance was mentioned a moment ago. We are assuming 8% increase, and you can see the numbers for both active as well as retired employees. Middlesex County retirement has certainly been a big focal point and continues to be of concern as it relates to this overall budget. You can see the increase respectively for the towns, for the region, and we continue to focus much like Steve commented on in terms of what this number will be, concerned once that report comes forward. I mentioned at the outset the focus on special education, and it's very understandable indeed. It is a concern across the Commonwealth from all that I have heard from many superintendents, and it's one that's shared certainly here. But nevertheless, it's one that we need to contend with. Within this budget right now, as it relates to circuit breaker, or again, as a point of reminder, the reimbursement that the state provides for extreme or excessive out-of-district costs, we are including circuit breaker reimbursement rate at 68%. That is indeed important to point out because that would be, or that would reflect rather a drop in some recent years. That being said, with the current state of the state's finances and the concern around where things will go with the new governor, it seems a prudent course to take in terms of dropping that reimbursement estimate down to 68%. Items that could change are mentioned briefly on this next slide. Case assessment, I think as trust members are aware, it's an important piece of, in terms of service delivery for an awful lot of our higher needs students, and those rates are not yet voted by Case Collaborative. Health Insurance Trust, similarly, rates are not voted as of yet, and as has been mentioned already, Middlesex Retirement, to date, at this point in time, we are still waiting what that final number will be. The next slide provides just a brief snapshot, but an important one, that captures the total out-of-district students right now that we know about. It's important to note, I've said this previously, I mentioned this on Budget Saturday, when we develop this budget for out-of-district costs, we literally go through, and I can attest to the fact that I was a part of that process, student by student, that we have a commitment to for out-of-district placement. These out-of-district costs, as I'm sure members know well, can range greatly, from $30,000 or $40,000 to hundreds of thousands of dollars. So careful time and attention needs to be put forth in terms of not just forecasting, but predicting the students that we will hold responsibility for. That being said, the reality is that at any given time, any week, any month, this picture can change, and it can change by one student to the tune of $100,000. So it's one that is constantly in focus and carefully reviewed and monitored. The number that we have built in terms of out-of-district placement right now for our forecasts does not provide in padding, does not provide in students that we don't have responsibility for right now. Therefore, it continues to be obviously an area of concern, and I would suggest that if we hold steady on 68% reimbursement for circuit breaker, and if that comes in slightly higher, that will provide some relief if more students become part of our responsibility in this costly area. Where do things shape up in terms of adjustments from current fiscal year 15 and as we think forward to fiscal year 16? Staffing reductions were outlined and provide a little bit more detail at Budget Saturday, and since then the first two positions here are in accordance with adjustments that have been made starting a couple of years ago and will continue as it relates to declining enrollment. And we are building this budget around 2 classroom teacher reductions. In addition to that, custodial staff that has also been adjusted and that has been incorporated into this budget. and utility budget advisor. J.D. Head spoke a little bit more at length to that. And then combined with the positions that are being reduced, you can see down the bottom of the slide, health insurance in total of 51,000 is being reduced, and staff in total of 3.0 FTEs or full-time equivalent, as we refer to it. Staffing additions. This was the large part of the afternoon on Budget Saturday, as you heard from many members of the leadership team throughout the district, in terms of trying to put into context the changing needs of a large percentage of our students. And quite honestly, these staffing additions, as they've been captured here, reflect and strive to meet those increasing needs across a large portion of our population. In total, currently right now within the FY16 budget, there are 3.2 FTEs or full-time equivalents that are being proposed, and those do come with some health insurance as well. Capital outlay was mentioned earlier. Capital outlay is an area where I have heard on a number of occasions from a number of different folks, both within the school system and outside amongst town, the concern around trying to get a sound handle, if you will, on what our needs are to support our buildings, arguably to support some of the most important assets that any of our towns have. That is critical and that's important. Some of these items are routine maintenance, you might suggest, but in total they represent an investment in capital-related items that will help serve our students and our buildings for some time. And I talked about the budget summary. I'll skip over that, I think, right now, but in the essence of trying to get to perhaps your questions. This next slide, ALG, provides into context what the administration is considering based upon the ALG discussion that took place of recent time. And that was brought to the school committee at their last meeting and provided them with a summary. Christina mentioned at the outset the charge that was given to administration that we went into last meeting with. And the next two slides provide an overview of what amounts to possible budgetary reductions. I said on Budget Saturday, and I continue to believe, as I said before you as the superintendent of schools, that the total budget request at 4.89% captures the resource needs to provide continuity of service going forward into next school year. That being said, if the need exists to reduce this budget, clearly that can be done. That can be done with some degree of reduction in services or programs. And this reflects or captures the work of the administrators across the district in terms of areas that would be proposed. I should point out that these are broken, a couple of things I would wish to point out to you. These are broken down into categories which have been termed levels for no specific reason except to try and identify them. They were put together by the administrative team and have been worked on over the last number of weeks with no specific target in mind. That is to say, there was no bottom line that we were trying to get to. I would suggest to you that they reflect, starting with level 1, those that would be farther, I would suggest, away from the instructional core, farther away from classrooms, and then progressively, as we get to the levels, represent those that come closer to the instructional core or things that take place in the classroom. That being said, none of them, certainly in some way, shape, or form, all of them, rather, let me restate that, all of them in some way will impact students, will impact our programs, whether it's technology, and I'll just go through them quickly, or whether it's some other programs. The cuts in total of level 1 that are being proposed right now and are being considered by the school committee in total represent level 1, $264,000, and they are in no specific order. There are a number here that do touch upon technology and an effort to try and reduce or slow down replacement or pull back on service, whether it's service excuse me, to support our infrastructure or service to support the work of our faculty or staff. You can see at the EdTech, the infrastructure is being proposed of reducing that by $64,000 in total. The high school store reducing the hours of service that is overseen by those respective amounts you can see there, 0.37 FTE. Reduce contracts, again, EdTech, the third line, webmaster and contracts for support of our current web presence. The facilities study, I'll just speak a little bit more at length to that one there. You have heard me mention perhaps previously that the total estimate that we are carrying for a complete existing condition study of our building based upon square footage of 1 million square feet is estimated to be at $200,000. That study could be broken down into 2 phases over a 2-year time period, and I think could still get us to the same end. It simply means that it drags out a little bit what the final study would lead to in terms of identifying what our resource needs might be across the building and how that aligns to thinking about supporting teaching and learning going forward over the next number of decades. But it could be done. Security cameras, there has been an effort to try and continue to develop and put more resources into the area of security. We would pull back on that slightly, not completely, but slightly to try and slow down that. And sum total level 1, as you can see, would collectively lead to $264,000. Level 2 is on the next page. Again, these were in with no specific targets as they were developed. They did happen to land in a similar total value. And you can see in total $200,200, level 2 combined. Probably too many in the context of time and for discussion here to go through, but certainly happy to speak to any of these if you would like. This next slide provides a summary of what the impact of these cuts or reductions would look like in terms of both the overall increase in budget from FY15 as well as the impact on the assessment. The middle column, level 1, you can see if all of those reductions were put into place, that would impact the assessment and drop that down to, at the bottom, you can see there 6.5% for Acton and 4.6% for Boxborough, respectively. And level 1 and level 2 combined, you can see at the bottom right-hand side of the slide and the impact on assessment there. So a very abbreviated presentation. I recognize, certainly from the amount of time that was taken on Budget Saturday and time since, but it's understood that the opportunity here is also for questions and further discussion. So with that, I'm happy to do so, or with Claire, my wonderful assistant here, or members of the committee. Thanks.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Christina. I think most of us attended Budget Saturday. We had a fair amount of background. I will say that I still find this budget remarkable in that our assessment was going up 7-something%, and yet there's no increase in headcount. It's all being driven by compensation, fringe benefits, and a little bit of sped transportation, most of which are not discretionary because these are contracts that are not up yet. So there's not a lot of room to maneuver, and I appreciate the efforts that you have gone to find some potential reductions. With that, I'll open it for questions. Bill.
One thing I have been focusing in on is trying to understand how we allocate revenue to each of the operating entities in the town. And I guess earlier this evening, Steve Ledoux and Steve Barrett said that 37.9% of their budget versus your budget. So that would mean yours is 62.1%. Does that make sense to you? those numbers?
Well, the actual calculation was done on who had to cut what, so it wasn't exactly revenue.
No, these are budgets numbers, but no. I'm sorry, Claire, you were going to...
I was just going to say, I've just heard those numbers, but I've never tried to calculate them because I tend to just look at our district as a self-contained entity at this point.
Okay, well, yeah, well, this is counting the district as one entity. So I'm talking about the municipal budget being 37.9% of the total budgets. Okay, you don't, because they talked about $222,000 of cuts.
Sorry, I think I can help. In the ALG plan, there's a back sheet that shows the town school allocation, and that's what it is now. It's, I think, 63.1 for the schools.
Of budget? Not revenue.
I'm not 100% sure off the top of my head.
All right, it doesn't matter specifically to the numbers, but it does matter to the substance of the question, which is that, so they, you know, I just was following Steve Ledoux's calculation of how he came up with $222,000 of cuts on a $585,000 request, and that, and he said it was 37.9% basically on the budgets. So then backing in 62.1%. So that, you know, on a, that means on an AB budget, that's $363,000. If you just take 80% of that, that means it's $454,000 of Acton Boxborough cuts. Right? Okay, just want to make sure. So, you know, if that were to be the case, you get down into level 2 cuts, probably halfway through level 2. You're at $222,000, actually the whole of level 1 and level 2 to meet the 454. Is that just, okay, I'm just trying to make sure I understand.
Your math is good.
So if indeed the ALG plan that was talked about, level 1 and level 2 cuts would have to be done. Yeah, okay. So I had asked a question the other day is, you know, and one of the things that nobody thinks about anymore, and maybe we shouldn't think about these anything more, is how we allocate revenue and how we allocate deficits. And so if we're going to choose to allocate revenue on roughly 67.1 and 62.1 and 37.1, shouldn't we allocate the deficits? And I'd be interested to know whether you think that's a relevant comment or not.
Who's taking this question?
Talk among yourselves if you want.
I know we've talked about this a bit, and I know I've talked with Steve Noon about this a bit. I don't know who the best person is to answer this
I guess my question is, do you think it, in your own minds, you know, and I'm not, this is not a trick question or anything like that. I mean, it's just
I think there's
you don't
really
think, you don't think about it, and so in other words, if the deficit is $2 million and so there's a pot of money over here from the town that is $2 million of free cash, then let's use that to plug the deficit. You don't think of allocating the deficit in the same way you think of allocating the revenues.
And I think there's not an easy answer as to what's correct, but we have been thinking about the issue, and I know you've brought it up in the past this year. That's why we have in our presentation information on our level of E&D, which is quite low, but also on turnbacks, recent turnbacks to the town of Acton and back to the region, which I think can help put it into context.
Sure. I think, you know, do you know, happen to know, or I mentioned this the other day, about how much of the current free cash of $9.3 million that we're talking about, it relates to APS turnbacks? I had asked this question the other day. Anybody? Another, well, I think I'm stumping people. I don't mean to be stumping people.
I guess I would comment that, not to make it more complicated, but we have a list in here of the last 10 years' worth of turnbacks.
That's E&D, right.
Turnbacks turnbacks from APS to the town. But how much of your current balance relates to those turnbacks depends on what you've had not just come into it, but also go out of it over the last several years. So I don't know without a full analysis and coupled with trying to understand exactly how your mind is working, because I'm new to
actually,
this.
it does total it. It's $2.5 million. Okay, all right. All right, so my point is there's $2.5 million of the $9.3 million that you could directly relate to APS. So when we start talking about how we're going to allocate the split, you can start with saying there's 2.5 already in there.
Well, to be precise, as Claire was saying, there's 2.5 that's been turned back, but that's after some reserves have been applied to those budgets. So it's not net 2.5.
Yeah, but it's not zero.
No.
I mean, some portion of so, okay, well, I continue to try to encourage you all to try to think about that. I think it's the way I've been thinking about it, and maybe, I think Bob has said several times that it might not be relevant anymore, and if you don't think it's relevant and can tell me why it's not relevant, that'd be good to hear this. The only real question I have, and I think you're going to hear as we go down the line that there's a lot of people feel this is a steep taxation issue. So I encourage you to try to do what you can. But you mentioned the declining enrollment is going to continue to reduce the Chapter 70 funding in future years. And the second thing is that regional aid that related to the combination is going to decline. So starting from the top in the next, not even this year, but next year's, you're already going to be behind. So this is, I just think it is a time to really face those facts, you know, and to say, where is the upper limit for this increased taxation? As Steve said, you're in a bind. There's not a lot in here that you could say, oh, that's a waste of money. You know, that service is useless. I don't think you're going to hear a lot of that from this board, maybe, but that's where the toughness comes in. And I do encourage you to make the cuts that were suggested by ALG. Regrettably, I think it's going to be the level 1 and level 2 if you're going to comply with it. But as I say, with a 3% increase that's built in year to year just on a level service and a declining next year automatic decline in Chapter 70 based upon the formula and an automatic reduction because you're going to lose $200,000 of regional transportation cash coming in, your revenue is going to be hurt next year and the next several years. So I encourage you to try to be as frugal as you can on this. So thank you.
Marianne.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry I wasn't able to join you for Budget Saturday. I'm not sorry for the reason I couldn't join you, but I am sorry I couldn't join you. And I made up for it by having my own little Budget Saturday last weekend and watching your school committee meeting and the Board of Selectmen meeting and getting caught up on what I missed. I think I have a couple themes here. So first of all, I want to thank you for planning for the capital needs assessment. I think that is vital. I think we've all been saying that to you for several years. If you need to split it into two pieces, I heard you explain how you could do that. I'm very comfortable with that, but I think it's very important that you begin that effort. And I thought JD said that very well at your last meeting, that you know the new buildings are 11 and 12 years old, and time is ticking. So that's great. The only other thing I'd add on the capital issue, and I heard you talk about this in your slides at the school committee meeting, but I hope you would look carefully. I think both the bleachers at the high school and the Parker Damon cafeteria tables are things that potentially could be funded by ComEd, and the other source possibly on the cafeteria tables, and I haven't look through your materials from Budget Saturday to see what your level is on the lunch revolving account, but that's another place that I know we have in the past purchased lunchroom tables from that, and if there was a way to, you know, do that, I think that would be worth looking at. The two things I'd really like to talk about are, if you could go back to your slide 18 on FY16 items that could change, and I'm just hoping you could help me understand what the risks are here and which way these might go. So Middlesex retirement, I've heard about that. I'm comfortable with that. I'm hoping that either one of you or perhaps Bob could say which way you think the risk is on the health insurance trust. But then I really need some help understanding both which way the case assessment could go and the circuit breaker. And on circuit breaker, I guess I thought that you had taken a hit on that in the 9C cuts. Is that accurate? So is the 68% what FY15 looks like right now? And maybe that's the easiest place to start. But I just would like to understand what the risks are here.
I'll start with the case assessment. Quite frankly, I'm not sure what the risk is. They were looking for increases on, they've switched their entire assessment model effective in fiscal 15 to a tuition-based model where there's 3 tiers of tuition rates depending on the level of service the student requires. As you know, in the past, this was always fixed at the assessment based on students 2 years prior, so we had budget certainty around that area. We don't now. I think about 20, there was a slide with the number of students that are case students, but it's a good portion of our total enrollment. We've planned our budget for tuition increases next year. They haven't voted their rate schedule yet. Assuming a 5% increase on case, whereas we used 3% on all other tuitions. The state OSD rate for the rates for private tuitions that they control is supposed to be 1.43 unless they're giving exceptions out for extraordinary circumstances to any of those providers. So we feel like with 3% we should be okay with on the rate risk. On case, they're talking about possibly up to 7%, and I don't know that organization well enough. It's in a bit of flux with its executive management right now to have a, they were saying 3 to 7, so I picked 5, frankly. So the risk is there, but how much, I'm not sure.
Okay, so thank you. That helped clarify what you've actually budgeted for. How about circuit breaker? Do you feel comfortable with the 68%?
Current year, we thought, there was, you're absolutely correct, Mary Ann, there was a 9C cut impact to that. In November, it was 1.5%, but the Department of Ed was anticipating that they would backfill that cut with the funds that are separately budgeted at the state level for extraordinary relief for the school districts, not for the providers. When the second 9C cut came along under Governor Baker, it's a pretty small amount, but that made me question whether the best wishes of the Department of Ed were going to survive the new administration. And so internally in my 15 budget plan, I'm no longer planning on getting my full $2 million, $2,044,000 that I expect this year. I need to do a little more work to see what the impact of that might be, but I think it's probably around $45,000. So roughly, I think I might end up with about $2 million this year. That would be, instead of the 75% rate they promised, around 72 or 3. So not too bad. So dropping from 72 down to 68, we hope is providing. Now, there's 2 factors to that estimate. One is, what do we think this year's actual tuition is going to be, and the other, and then applying it to the formula. So hopefully the projection was well prepared. I don't know.
Thank you. Health insurance, I'm clear what you budgeted. When will Health Insurance Trust vote, Bob?
We're not going to vote on the 19th.
Of February. Okay. Okay. Can I ask one more?
Sure.
I guess my last thing is I support what Bill said, that I think, you know, unfortunately, you're not looking at just this year, but you're looking at where things are marching going forward. And the revenue picture does not look good. I think, I guess my personal thought is that I think you, and this is as much school committee members as it is your job as superintendent, but I think you need to have a conversation with the community about why it is that enrollment's going down and we continue to add FTE or offsetting FTE. And even as I look through your level 1 and level 2 reductions, and I thought you did a very thoughtful look at those at your last school committee meeting, if I added up correctly in these level 1 and level 2, you're reducing 2.26 FTE, but the budgetary impact of all of that is just barely over 100,000. It's 117,000. And I think, again, it's hard to imagine that you're going to be able to slow the growth without slowing down the FTE and unfortunately, the FTE that deliver the real value. And I think that's an ongoing conversation that needs to be had with the community, not necessarily with the Finance Committee, but with the community at large. So I would encourage you to find opportunities to do that. And I hope that the school committee, when you have some time to reflect on this, that you support the consensus that ALG reached to try to reduce that down. Have any of you or has Steve figured out what the assessment for Acton looks like if you implemented these level 1 and level 2 cuts?
It's on the last
Oh, it's on the last slide. I'm sorry. Sorry. Got it. Thank you. Sorry.
That's all right. Herman.
Good evening. I just hate it when everybody before me says exactly what I plan to say. Yeah, but you've done it. You did just a remarkable job. I would like to just reiterate. I don't think there's very many people in Acton who got a 6% increase in their revenue, their household revenue last year. So anything that you basically raise over and above the CPI, you're reducing the quality of life to an extent of our citizens. It's simple math. You need to keep that in mind. You also need to keep in mind, so 6%, 6.2 is still what I consider to be excessive. And I just take a look at it. Well, for starters, I echo the two predecessors. For sure, is my opinion, you should implement both levels 1 and 2, which is the consensus arrived at the ALG. It is basically our system, it's our procedure, and you should respect that, in my opinion. And that's given. With regard to additional cuts, I find it interesting that you reduced the head count by 3 point something, 2, but then you saw an opportunity and you raised it by a like amount. But the people you added, the FTTs you added, weren't in the teachers. They were, because of declining enrollment, they were support people. And I think that you need to take a closer look at that and increase levels 1 and 2 by some reduction in the FTEs that you plan to add. And I am definitely consistent with both Bill and Mary Ann. You're going to have some reduction in revenue in the future. And the logic of standing before town meeting and saying, we have a reduction in enrollment, and oh, by the way, your assessment goes up 6%, is going to be something that I agree with Mary Ann. You're going to have a very serious and a thorough conversation with the citizens. It's going to be a very interesting debate at town meeting, I believe. So I would also encourage you to be prudent in your deliberations this coming decision-making meeting you're going to have.
Doug.
Ditto what Herman just said about other people hitting on the points that he carefully crafted. I guess there are some things that are themes that we're moving in the direction towards. One of the things that happened when we went through the consolidation, merger, and so on of the two towns is that of schools, was that there was going to be a savings, and at the time that was being broadcast, and Dennis will remember some conversations that we had about this, is at the time I said, you know, the savings are unimportant. I mean, and the problem with them is that only $1 million. The problem was is that in the context of a budget this large, they can disappear in a heartbeat. And the absence of the savings is more important and more damaging than claiming that you're going to save money. And even if you did save $1 million, if you say you're going to save it and you fail to save it, it gets you in more trouble. And so I think that being able to be clear about what happens in terms of for example, on enrollment, enrollment goes down, expenses go up. How come? I've said this before, and I'll repeat it, that's all you do is hand an axe handle to your enemies, the tax cranks and so on, who wouldn't approve any kind of increased school budget if their lives depended on it, or so it seems sometimes. Better to take that out of their hands and put out a very clear explanation for what happened to the enrollment, be 100% candid about it, all daylight, and say, well, here's exactly what's going on. There it is. Read it and weep. And the same thing if we'd taken that kind of an approach to the savings, I think we could have avoided a black eye on that point as well. A couple of things that I guess I've repeated lots and lots, and it is that I think that comparability is extremely useful. I mean, to me, it's inconceivable that a private sector business would operate in a vacuum without any knowledge about what its competitors are doing. Where do we stand against, Apple, says IBM, and so on, right? I mean, they know where everybody else is. They know it in detail, and it helps to inform their planning. It's very useful to have data available about what comparable communities are doing in terms of increases in compensation and benefits, in terms of initiatives like the superintendent has put forward with the capital study, which I totally support, and if you can do it in two pieces, that's great, because this is a long-term thing, so take it in two pieces. The fact that we don't really have the ability to say, well, community X, which is truly a peer of ours, not because they're geographically close, but because their population, their income, their budget history, where their kids stand in terms of competitiveness and so on. That's the peer, and it may be maybe Long Meadow, Massachusetts, or something, for all I know. But having that data available and on hand to say, here's where we stand against the people that are like us. Okay, and if you can in the process demonstrate that they're experiencing the same kinds of problems that you are, or experiencing many of the kinds of trends that you are, then you buy yourself a huge amount of credibility. And at a time when you're going to do a 7% pop followed by 2 years of maybe 5 or 6%, this is awful useful stuff to have. There's a lot on the table, I think, and I would urge you to get into this comparability question. Another thing, and it's a theme I've raised before, is the change in the nature of the product that you provide. Schools, when I was going through, and most of us who are in my age group, were completely different than they are now. I mean, for one thing, SPED is just huge. It didn't exist. The demands on teachers, the demands on administrators, the kinds of challenges that you have to face, the kind of education that you have to have, the kind of motivation that you have to bring with you every day you go to work is different than it was a number of decades ago, and even fairly recently. And that drives budget to me. And so we should be very clear and very articulate about what the challenge is that we face each year. And as new challenges come up and old challenges go away, we need to be able to account for those and say, well, we're no longer emphasizing that. We're emphasizing this because this is much more jeopardy for our kids. So this is the emphasis that we're taking. And this is why we're pushing as hard as we are in that direction. So the changing nature of the educational product is something that should be thematic. It should be part of what's going on. I'm sympathetic with what Herman is saying about the burden on the Acton taxpayer over time. We do have high taxes. There are good reasons why our taxes are as high as they are, and the schools are not the only explanation for it. So, you know, as a community, we need to be aware of what's driving the difference between us and other towns. And again, comparability comes into that. What other towns and what are they experiencing? So I think that taking it out over time and making, for example, if you're going to say it's 7% now and it's 4% next year and 4% the year after that, take it at the bank. That's one thing. But if you don't have the credibility to say, and it's only going to be 4% the next year and the next year, then people are going to look at the 7% and say this thing's out of control, or it's going to feel like it's out of control. So being able to be confident in explaining to people what the impact on them personally, financially, is going to be as a result of increases in the cost of education in Acton is important, and I think that should be part of it. The other thing, I guess the last thing I would say is that in a large, complicated enterprise like this, you know, you start talking about $80 million. You've got a lot of moving parts that were put in place years ago. I mean, there's things that you do in 2015, you put it in place, it solves a problem, and you move on. And by 2019, nobody remembers, you know, why you did it, what it was for. And I think that a retro look is also useful in saying, what did we do back in 2010? What were our initiatives? What were the programs that we were supporting in those 3 years from 10 to 13? And where do they stand now? Are they still important to us? Are they still relevant? Are they still producing? Because if they are, then let's talk about them. But if they're not, let's get rid of them and talk about the program that will replace it, that will make much better use out of people's money and have a much stronger delivery for the constituency, which of course is the kids. So if you can say, look, during the course of this budget, we dumped this and this program and replaced it with these programs, and here are the positive impacts that we expect. Oh, and by the way, it's revenue neutral. Sorry, I couldn't save you any money by dumping these programs because I built the new ones. It's okay, it seems to me, if you're going to say, I'm not trying to save you money, I'm trying to make sure that every dollar that you spend on education in Acton is worthwhile. And here's how I'm doing that, you know, over time, both retrospectively and prospectively. That's it. Thank you.
Mike.
Well, I don't envy your job of trying to cut that big budget, but nevertheless, you know, the superintendent and the school board should be justifiably proud of the end product of the educational content that the kids receive, and you know, the pride it brings to the town of Acton. Nevertheless, this regionalization concept was promised to deliver you know, some economies of scales and operational efficiencies that would take some of the burden off the town of Acton taxpayer, and you know, we haven't seen it. And by looking at the nature of the cuts, I see it's got to be a hard process, and I'm sure you went through it with a fine-tooth comb, although, it's, you know, without beating a dead horse. And it looks like you're absolutely staying away from the educational, or from the classroom piece of the budget, just infrastructure efficiencies or changes. I wish I had some advice, but I was just wondering on how to approach some of this and remove some of this burden. But it's just building on itself. Like next year, it'll be worse because the issue will be compounding year after year, even with a declining enrollment. Our fixed costs are sort of out of control. Well, I won't say out of control, but harder to control, without saying, using the other phraseology. It's just, you know, you just wonder is there grant money out there that can cover some of this stuff? Other sources of funding, having some whiz kid college intern that wants to score some points by, identifying some grant money and just writing it up and getting this and that. But the other thing that was mentioned was the educational content itself, which is really none of our business. It seems like the programs change over time. I graduated from high school 50 years ago, and the new school that they built after I left is now 50 years old. And the classes that I went through to an engineering high school, and some of the technologies we learned then, are obsolete today, obviously, and some of the product that they are producing is, would have been unheard of, 10 years ago. And I'm sure the things that you'll be teaching in 5 years probably don't even exist today. So, that product is ever evolving and changing, but I just recognize that you have a tough job, and I appreciate the effort you're putting in, but you also have to think of the other side of the coin, the taxpayer. It's a burden for them. We're trying to protect their interests as well as maintain their, the fine educational product that you are producing. So we acknowledge it's a dilemma, and I just wish I had some sage advice to give you, but I don't. So good luck.
Margaret.
Thank you. So just a quick comment on the idea of the comparables, which I definitely agree with Doug. I think it would be very useful to have that kind of data. I do know that, when I was working with Acton 2020, one thing that really stood out is we do have a very large K-12 population, as an overall ratio to our, to our overall population. And so that gives us a massive structural challenge, period. And we have very few of those students also that go to private schools and compared to other comparable communities. And I also know that other communities are struggling with this special ed issue as well. And, I know that there's some work being done to try to change that at the state level. I guess my major observation about this budget and the town budget is just kind of going back to Bill's point. It seems kind of crazy that the town budget is going up 1.62%, and yet they're adding all these things. I mean, they're putting in, a fixed rate shuttle, and, and they're putting in the nursing, and they're, adding a big FTE and these different things. And then you guys seem to be doing nothing new, really, at all. And yet the budget's going up a ton. And I'm just trying to figure out what accounts for that. I mean, is it just salaries, really? Is it just that these contracts that we've been locked into with the unions are just so much higher than what the towns are? I'm still struggling with what Bill questioned the town about, because it just seems like there's something amiss there. But, I mean, is that really the major driver? I know in the slide it says the 2.6%, which doesn't seem like an enormous amount, frankly, but is that what we're really contending with?
So, I was just pulling out my Budget Saturday binder because there's a great deal of detail in the binder, and I believe the Finance Committee also received one, but Marie put together a complete analysis of the reasons for the change in the personnel cost and the cost of the contract and what the components of that were. And so I would really respectfully refer you to that material because it's much more accurate than anything that might be sort of smoothed over through me replying to your question.
Thank you.
The 2.9% is 2.9 of the 4.9%. I don't know the right way to say it.
The budget would have add up.
The entire budget would have gone up 2.9% just on the personnel.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So it's not to say the overall cost of the contract is 2.9%. It's a little more than that.
Was it 2.9 or 2.6? Yeah.
2.6, sorry. Thank you.
So, yeah, I guess, we just have to as you've heard all these people opine about the problem that we have, as we go into new contract negotiations, when that comes up, we have to really be able to negotiate from a different perspective, I think, given these different structural things that we're struggling with enrollment going down, which should help us, but yet somehow not because of the state aid going down and all of that. And then speaking of that, I'm wondering if there has been any modeling, and I'm sure there has been some kind of modeling of how you deal with declining enrollment. So, obviously if it's, a couple students here and there in different grades, that's not going to equate to one classroom, but you probably know how many in each grade. And so do you know over time, like over the next 5 years, you're going to be, having, this many fewer students, and therefore you're going to be able to cut that many FTEs, not necessarily overall, but just specifically there. Have you built that kind of a model?
Yes. The longer-term view, and obviously is relative to what the actual numbers drop to. A lot of it is projections, and sometimes that data holds, and right now it seems to be. But I know Marie and with principals have developed a longer term or view to look at trying to reduce sections across the elementary level, and then correspondingly as that cohort progresses to the junior high and high school level. So it's gradual, it's over time, and obviously if it stands the test of time, it will be attributed to what the forecasts hold to be. If they drop more rapidly, then there might be the opportunity for greater adjustments, and obviously if the reverse of that is true and those projections don't hold, then those projections may have to be revised. But Maria's done some great work in terms of modeling what that looks like over the course of a number of years, and working in conjunction with principals to put into place reduced sections at each of the grade levels. So we have that view.
Yeah, it just seems like eventually, even though you're getting less revenue from the state because of declining enrollment, it seems like eventually it should go the other way, in the sense that even though you're getting declining revenue from the state, we're not having to pay as much because we don't have those students, even though that's holding everything else equal, I understand. And that doesn't always happen, that won't happen. But anyway, all right, well, thank you, and I personally appreciate all the work that you all do. As you know, I have 4 kids in the system right now, and another one coming up eventually, and so I know I'm contributing to that K-12.
You're doing your best for the enrollment, Margaret.
But I really do appreciate it, and I thank you for your work. Thank you.
Bob.
Should I say now we know why the costs are going up so much? On the other hand, I can't talk because I had 7 children educated in this system, so I'm very much appreciative of it. And of course, the problem of class sizes being out of line with the rest of the state, for pupil costs being low with the rest of the state, and the tax rate being very high, but the rest of the state has been around for probably the same number of 50 years that Mike has, since Mike graduated from high school. For assigning you workloads, which it seems to me most of my colleagues were doing, and asking for all kinds of different things, not in the near future, but sometime in your leisure during the summer or next year or sometime, the expectations for growth in costs and revenue with regionalization that were prepared before we regionalized. And I realize the superintendent and the finance director bear no responsibilities for these, painted a very different picture than you were painting. And I think your painting is not necessarily wrong, it's different. And someday it would be nice to understand what were the underlying factors that gave rise to this. With regard to the specific budget today, my basic problem is with the assistant athletic director at the junior high. It's only $3,000. But in a world where taxes shouldn't go up more than 2.5%, where Social Security income, once you deduct the increase in Medicare costs, hardly goes up at all for older residents, and you're looking at a 4.8% increase in operating costs, and then with declining revenue, and then, of course, the unfortunate fact that Acton is growing. It may, absolute students may be going down, but relatively speaking, Acton students are growing, so it paints a different picture. I would have hoped that you would have taken a very fine pencil to the budget. That $3,000 should never, in my mind, have ever been in the 4.89%. And I suspect there are a variety of other places in there that could be taken out. And as you look forward to next year's budget, because you don't want to repeat 7% year after year, I hope some of this can be done. The declining enrollment part is difficult, but what you see in this budget, what we saw in last year's budget, were essentially the marginal costs. You close a classroom, the teacher does not need to be replaced. I suspect between retirements and leaving, you didn't lay anybody off because of declining enrollment. Your fixed cost per student went up, and there are lots of places where that fixed cost needs to be adjusted. It doesn't necessarily need to be adjusted all at one time, but you've got to look at that as well in this declining enrollment thing. But I do appreciate the clarity of the presentation, especially on Saturday, and this was an abbreviated version of it, so it obviously maintains the same high level of clarity.
All right, well, you had more advice than questions, I think. I would like to, again, commend you on a job well done of putting this budget together. It has been transparent from the beginning. It unfortunately delivered some bad numbers, bad in the sense of too big. But the process of putting it together was excellent. Unfortunately, when we get to town meeting, you're not going to have 8 hours like we had on Budget Saturday to get the point across. You're going to have 20 minutes. So you've got a lot of work to do. And we're really looking at two problems. The first is this year, which I encourage you to try and come up with the cuts that we talked about at ALG. But really, this is kind of the beginning of a new era in town finance. If we look at the ALG plan for FY17, we're showing a $3.7 million deficit as opposed to a $2.4 million deficit. So we really have to start now thinking about next year, and pretty much everything has to be put on the table in terms of how we're going to at least narrow that gap. But I do appreciate the fact that you're in a bit of a bind this year. I think overall the dollar increase is $3.5 million, and if I added it up correctly, all but $500,000 is taken up from salaries, health care, OPEB, Middlesex, and SPED, which means what we're asking for is just about everything else. So I don't envy your task. I appreciate the effort you put into it so far, and look forward to hearing what you come up with on Thursday.
Could I just take 1 minute?
Sure.
For wrap up? Thank you. I've heard a couple of times comments about declining enrollment, and I just would like to clarify. We've been very clear in these presentations that, yes, our population is declining slightly, but it's also changing in very important ways. The staffing additions that we have listed are in response to those changes, and those are the increases in the high-needs populations of SPED, low-income students, and English language learners. So that's part of our story, and that's going to be front and center at town meeting. That's the very important reason for these new additions. It was our hope that by coming here tonight and having you look at and think about the cuts that we're thinking about, just to get out there, at least our feeling that they're not superfluous. We may decide differently, or debate the junior high athletic director, but anyway, we believe that they are not superfluous. They're areas that will impact the students, and they're likely to be permanent. I've observed cuts in the past made in the schools, and those things don't come back. Yet we are a regional district, and our school committee is committed to working with both of our towns, both of our finance committees, the ALG and the BLF as this process moves forward. We are listening, and we are trying to make the best decisions for our students. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. The next item on the agenda is a report on the Acton Leadership Group meeting of February 5th. I think you've heard a bit about it tonight. I know I sent you a brief outline of what transpired that day, on that day. Essentially, what we were seeing was an ALG model, and that's the one that's attached in your packet, that showed a taxation at the full 2.5% and the reclaiming of $985,000 worth of previously untaxed levy capacity, meaning all the years that we didn't go up the full 2.5%, that capacity is still there. That is all the capacity there is, and it's more than I thought there was. So when you added that $985,000 onto a 2.5% increase, which raises about $1.8 million, and worked it through the average single-family taxpayer calculation, we were looking at a 5% increase in taxes on an average single-family residence, which is a lot. We hadn't had a chance to meet because of the snow day. Mike and I took it upon ourselves to negotiate on our behalf. In our point of view, we had said 2%, not 2.5%. We had said OPEB at 1.4 versus what now is working out to 1.2. And we had said no reclamation whatsoever of the unused levy capacity. We also had said level service budgets, which remarkably these budgets look a lot like level service budgets. They're just going up a lot in dollars. So what we had conceded was that we figured the OPEB was a fait accompli. It was going to be 1.2. We conceded that we'd have to go up to the 2.5%. And then we basically traded the use of $400,000 in unused levy capacity for the $585,000 in cuts. The calculation was done right there at ALG, and the split was 222 versus whatever for the schools. So that's where those numbers came from. And I think that night the selectmen met and voted their $222,000 in reductions, which Steve Ledoux explained. The school committee also met, considered them. I believe the issue that they talked so well about in terms of some numbers that are still wandering about, the case assessment, the Middlesex number, the healthcare number, gave them pause. And it was rather new news that day. So again, as they said, they'll meet again Thursday. I think what Mike and I are looking for would be support for what we negotiated, and any further guidance you'd like to give us as we meet again on February 20th. Actually, we'll meet again before the next ALG. Mike, would you like to add anything to that?
I think you covered it pretty well.
All right. Mary Ann.
So I'm comfortable with what you negotiated. I would have liked to have let the unused capacity go completely, but I understand that there wasn't support for that. So I think the compromise you worked out is good, assuming that the school committee actually votes to do that, which is still up in the air. If I did my calculation correctly on the ALG spreadsheet, it looks like if these, with the revenues you're talking about, but I haven't factored in the reduced budgets, it looks like about a 4.2% increase on the tax levy. Is that?
That's what I came up with.
So then for me, the next question is, and you do want me to say this for you, because if anyone else were chairing, you would be saying this, but we need to see the out years. And I know that's where you will go next. But I think, you know, again, I would like to see what they look like going forward. The numbers right now don't look great. And in particular, if leaving some of the untaxed levy capacity on the table this year means that's going to get scooped up into next year, I'd like to know that and present that to town meeting.
Bill.
Can I just ask a quick clarifying question? I'm sorry. So there was the 2.5% full tax. Then there was the 985 in unused tax levy. When you negotiated to get it down, you know, the what was it, 565 total?
585.
585 in cuts. Where did that come from? Is that not using some of that levy? Or
Correct.
is it, okay, so now we're only using like 400 something? Is
Right.
that what it is? Okay, I just want to make sure. Because does the ALG spreadsheet, is it still using that 985?
No, the version you have is the one we were looking at. It hasn't been changed in any respect.
The one, and then the one that you sent us to? Okay, all right.
The
sorry.
extra 0.5% is around 350. So we gave a little bit more than we got, but we thought we needed to do something to move them forward. Yes, Bill?
Just to be clear, on every year that you don't raise the tax to the 2.5% level, that is, the taxpayers get that money. So it's not like 2 years ago we saved 300,000, last year we saved 500,000, so this year it's 800,000. It's every year, so that once that is saved for the taxpayers, it is saved. So
Then what's the unused tax?
correct.
Isn't
So I
that
just
what
want to make sure, because I got an inference from your comment that this was the aggregate of all these past years. We haven't raised taxes to the full 2.5% out of 5 out of the last 8 years. So, but it's only the last year, so it's the raise from this year to get to the 985. Why is it so high? Because it was lowered because of the tax recap process. Our taxes actually went down even lower than we had in our point of view last year. So just very important to know that we're fighting all the time for the taxpayers, and that 985, it's not like we recovered all of those past years in this 1 year. Not like a unused warrant article, okay? Everybody agree? Okay, good. I think we should not recover that, and I think that we should use, first of all, I think, you know, the stabilization has seemed to have, you know, it's not part of anybody's discussion. The selectmen and the town manager had talked about 2 million. What did we talk about? We talked about 900.
400. I thought you said 400,000 this year.
I thought it was
400,000
900. Was it two funds of 450, so 900,000, I think it was. So I think we should reduce the stabilization and not use the tax levy to the, you know, raise it back up to that. Don't recover the full 985. Just simply to try to ease some of the burden on the tax increase. I agree with you, Steve. I mean, you look at these budgets, and it's not like you can rip out a lot of things and say these are unessential. You know, there's waste in money. And Christina's comment is accurate. We can still argue all the time whether the product that is being delivered at the school is the product that we want, but that's the product that must be delivered right now by our laws, especially with underserved populations, SPED, English language learners, and that type of, and also low-income students who, generally speaking, as a group, have higher needs in the school system. So, but we can still help the taxpayer, increase the use of the reserves by that amount, and go for it.
Bob?
Bill got there first, but I quite agree. We should raise reserves use and not the untaxed tax levy. The reserves are taxes from past taxpayers that they've paid. The new thing is asking, you know, I've got all this money over here, but please give me some more. And that's not a good idea.
All right, so just to clarify, what you guys are proposing is we don't reclaim the 400,000 unused tax levy and we pump up more reserves.
Right, with the exchange being, and the statement being that, you know, the operating entities have reduced their budgets, and we are pitching in by saying, we're giving in a number of things. You know, obviously, the increase from 2 to 2.5 is one, but also increasing the amount of reserves to be used. And I think concomitantly with that, the $2 million stabilization has to be reduced to more like our number, like 900,000.
Okay. Doug?
I'm a little different position. We have $10 million in reserves. You know, this has to be one of the highest reserves in the state, even for communities much larger than ours, and probably some communities that are much wealthier than ours. What are we doing sitting on $10 million? So I don't like the idea of going from 2% to 2.5% when we've got a fortune in the bank. We taxed people too much. We were lucky on some budget items in the past. We accumulated a ton of money. Why are we raising taxes like this? We don't need to raise these taxes like this. You know, we have a hard time getting people to agree on a stabilization fund, which is nothing more than an effort to take money out of the reserve fund and say, this money's for special purposes. You know, and we'll have a community conversation about what we're going to do with the money that goes into the stabilization fund, whether it's used to support ops, whether it's used to support capital, whether it's for something more exotic in terms of what we're going to do to structure our future. That's what the stabilization fund is all about. Everything else is just cash that's lying around. We call it reserves. So why are we raising taxes when we have so much money in the bank? I just don't see the point of it.
Well, the obvious math is if the FY15 number now looks like a $2.9 million deficit, and the FY16 number looks like an almost $3 million deficit, and the stabilization fund is $2 million, then our $10 million just became very little. So I'm okay with not using the unused levy capacity. Whether it's reserves or unused levy capacity, they're both one-time events at this point. When they're gone, they're gone. But only one impacts the tax rate, so I'd rather not impact the tax rate if we can avoid it. As far as going to the 2.5%, I think we might as well, because looking at the out years, we're going to need it.
Well,
yeah, Mike.
Yeah, it's just a question of the $10 million. The obvious question is if that's too high, then what is the right number? What is the right level of reserves that we should use as a guideline?
Yeah, really.
Not necessary. It doesn't have to be a long discussion. The state recommendation is that we hold back on like 5%. Right. And then the state recommendation applies to all communities in the state, rich and poor alike. Some communities that are desperate and can't keep their street lights on, they need to have money standing by because they're going to get in trouble. They're not as stable as we are. And so with all of those averaged in, you're at 5%. So we don't need any more than 5%, and I advocate less. Meantime, we keep raising taxes when we have the difference. I don't see the point.
Well, we won't have it if we
Right, we won't. We'll get back to a rational situation where we have money set aside adequate to run the town, and we raise taxes as necessary, and we develop our budgets with full awareness of how much money we're going to have and not going to have coming from taxes. And it seems to me that's a much more rational system. One of the problems with having so much money in the bank is that I think it has a somewhat distortive effect on the budgeting process. It's too easy, I think, to say, well, let's do this, let's spend this money because we have all this money in reserves, we're loaded, so we can afford something. I'd much rather see a situation where we really have to think long and hard about raising expenses. Because we're not going to have the daddy warbucks in the bank to back us up. We're going to have to raise taxes to pay for the current budgets. That's where we're going to get back to sustainability.
Okay. I hear you. Other comments?
I don't know. I just think, I mean, I kind of agree with Doug in a way, because it really does, having all these reserves just does not provide the adequate discipline psychologically, it seems, for our budgets. And so it's almost like you could argue, well, why don't we just not raise taxes at all on people and use up all our reserves? I don't know how the numbers calculate. And then what happens, which I don't think we should do. But it's an interesting, where do we draw the line? The 2.5%, not using the unused tax levy capacity in terms of how quickly we want to go down using those reserves. I mean, in some ways, it really just puts off the fundamental operating problem that we have in our budgets. Unless, again, we're always over budgeting and we're always going to be throwing back money into these reserves. But if that's not true, then we all know, that these numbers are not going to work in the next few years as the reserves get used. And so I guess the question is, how quickly do we want that to happen? And I don't know the answer to that. I don't have a super strong opinion, but I do think it's an interesting problem.
Well, if you turn to the ALG model, which is the second page, the FY16 deficit is pegged at 2.4 million, FY17 3.7, and FY18 at 4.5. So our $10 million is gone.
Gone right there.
Yes, Marianne.
But you're going to fix some of the problem in FY16 if you actually reduce those budgets. Those aren't the numbers you're going to carry forward.
Probably not going to affect them enough.
It's not, well, it depends, but that's back to my point about it depends what it is you're doing to reduce those numbers.
As I said, something has to be done, and everything has to get on the table.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Doug.
I mean, I would underscore a couple of things. One thing that Bob said was his concern about the stabilization fund was that you're setting aside money today to pay for something that the people setting the money aside now will not enjoy because there's turnover in town and people leave. So if you start saving money for something like a fire truck that you're not going to buy for 5 years, lots of people who live in Acton today won't benefit from it. And I think there's a lot of logic in that. But by the same token, what we've done is to tax people starting like 5 years ago more than we needed to and accumulated the money so that in 17 and 18, or later perhaps, we can finally break even. In other words, all that money that we taxed people 4 or 5 years ago is sitting in the reserves. And in other words, if you had come to me as a taxpayer and said, Mr. Tyndall, I'm going to tax you, let's see, X dollars. I'm not going to need it all. And I'm going to take the difference and I'm going to put it in savings so that the people who are living in Acton, I recognize that you may not still be here by then, but the people who are living in Acton in 2000XXX will be able to take your tax money from this year and enjoy it by reducing their expenses or spending money at a higher level than perhaps they ought to, because they don't have the need to have a fiscal discipline because your money is sitting in the bank waiting for them to spend it. How about that?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
My good friend Doug Tyndall has painted a broad picture with some broad strokes, and some of it isn't. Obviously there's some money that was come from the Neswick Enterprise Fund that had been set aside for a purpose, a very large amount, like $6 million, that had been set aside for other purposes. When the funding mechanism changed, there was an influx of cash that had come in from the state related to the change of formula that really prompted up. So it wasn't all taxation. But I guess my point, and we've talked about this, and that's why when Mike said, what is the appropriate level of reserves, we've talked about this for many, many, many times in these meetings. And for those of us who, for example, me, who have served on override committees, Together for Acton again, still together for Acton, you know, having, again,
is there a Friends of committee?
Friends of the Together for Acton, where when you go out and you have to go out and ask folks to vote to raise their taxes, it's in a large way. It's very hard. So, you know, having money aside. So when the answer of what is the right amount, it's a very difficult thing. You know, Steve's got a scenario here where it goes down very quickly. We've seen in the past that those predictions generally don't come true in an inflationary environment that we're currently in. We have a situation where in an environment of 7%, 6.9, 6.5, 6.2% in a low inflationary environment, that's exogenous variables are coming into play in our regional school system, which is going to demand the use of those reserves, if indeed you want to buy into that's the right level of service. So I guess my simple point is we've asked the schools to make some cuts. We've asked the town to make some cuts, and they're both trying, you know, and they're not getting all that they want. And we're not going to get all what we want. I'd love to have a no tax increase right now. But, you know, by saying that we're not going to go up to the levy capacity, that's still a good thing to do for the taxpaying public. It does reflect, you know, nobody around this table is saying that what we heard from the schools tonight is baloney. I mean, this is what's happening. It's real, and so we do need to fund it in some way. We're fighting at the margin right now, but if we have all three of us pitch in, selectmen pitch in, school committee pitch in, FinCom pitch in a little, and keep consciousness of the reserves going forward, I think we got a good deal right here. Every year is different. No, I'm not. Every year is like a blizzard.
Or like 5 feet of snowflake.
And if you haven't picked up that every year is different, I mean, this is just another example. This was different than last year. And next year is going to be different. And yeah, you already turning on your microphone already?
That's no reason not to plan.
So we can't, of course we're going to plan. But I think right now where we are is, I think the deal you cut was a good deal. We're trying to tweak it a little bit more because we want to be conscious of the taxpayer. We want to preserve another year of not raising that incremental, that $985,000, and I think that's a good message. The story that's told by the schools is a story of reality. You know, these are the students that are in front of us with the programs that they have and the educational services that we need to deliver for those students. And that's a fact. And so I recommend that we adopt the plan, which is to not recover the untaxed levy and go forward with all other elements.
Margaret.
Just have one other comment to make, which is that, you know, going back to when we were discussing or hearing from the school side, you know, it really seems like a lot of this is driven by the salaries and therefore the contracts that were gotten into. And, you know, I remember when the school committee came and presented to us about what they were negotiating. And for me, you know, all the numbers, and not being very experienced particularly, but all the numbers were just sort of like, I don't know what those numbers mean. I just don't know what they mean in a context. Now I see them in a context.
Yeah, you do.
Right? And they're not great. And so I guess, you know, when those contracts come back up again, I want to see them in a better context, or I'll just be more aware. Maybe you guys all were aware, but I'll just be more aware of how this affects it, because, you know, as numerous people pointed out, there's not a lot of room to do anything, and yet our budgets are going up a ton. And I support also the fact that they're adding these additional staff in the sense that they're there to support these high-need kids, and also to try to counteract, the way they explained it, as I understood on Budget Saturday, to counteract higher costs in the future to try to kind of control them, you know, in the beginning, which I think is the right strategy for, not just from a cost perspective, obviously, but from the individual child. So anyway, I think we have to watch for that better next time. It's or at least I will.
I'd entertain a motion to support the compromise at ALG.
Yes, with the additional thing of not raising the taxes to the full recovery of the 985,
Right.
and thus increasing the reserves as needed, and supporting the, encouraging the budget cuts as discussed.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Abstain, one abstention. And I take it you'd like us to try and use reserves instead of the money we left?
Yes,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
that was motion, right?
Yep. All right. Moving on. Minutes of January 13th.
Move to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
Who made that motion, Herman?
Bill moved.
I did.
Herman seconded, I think.
No.
Or was
I
vice
I
versa?
made it, Bill seconded, but who cares? Yeah, right.
Circulated a request from Nancy Banks. She's trying to schedule a joint meeting of all the boards to hear the Minuteman building situation. There were two dates. Let me know which ones work for you.
What were they?
The 11th, March 11th and March 18th?
Two Wednesday nights.
Yeah, they were Wednesday nights.
I guess we'll email.
We don't have a list of warrant articles, but I know some things will be up, so I'm gonna hand out some assignments. You can argue with me, you can horse trade with other people if you don't like your assignments. But the town operating budget, Mike, that's yours. Herman, you take capital. Margaret, pay as you throw.
Oh, really?
You seem to know a lot about trash.
Thank you. Okay, well, I won't say anything. We'll not respond to that one.
Local options, meal tax, Doug, and I had them still pegged together, so I was going to give you the economic development land use position as well. Bill stabilization fund, Mary Ann, the AB regional assessment. Minuteman assessment, that's yours, Mike. CPC will be rolling. Reusing the old articles for Harris Street. Bill, would you take that? Sure. Fixed route transportation, Margaret, that's yours.
Oh, jeez.
I know.
This is really interesting.
Senior tax relief, Bob, if you would take that. And there's possible other acquisitions of property, so I'd like you to take those too, Bob, when they come up.
Is that the SATSAC you have in mind?
I think.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'm the...
If you want it, if it's
Yeah,
related
I've
to
been
the train
separated.
station, that's fine.
But the local meals tax is a separate thing, even though it's supposed to fund the fixed route, right? Okay, so.
I'll do that.
So you want the SATSAC one?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. If you're going to complain about it, I'm not going to send it to you.
She just wants to see it in writing.
Boy, she lucky. Pay as you throw.
Committee reports. Who's got a committee report? You do. Margaret.
So Kelly's Corner, at our last meeting, we had some really interesting scenarios put forth for us in terms of the viability of different pieces, kind of different chunks of property in Kelly's Corner, if some adjustments were made in zoning or not, which some of them are more hopeful than others, given various different circumstances. It was an interesting night, but we actually told the consultants to go back and get us more scenarios that were a little bit more robust and more comprehensive. But anyway, so that's going well. And it's really on track. I think there'll probably be a public meeting, either, it was supposed to be March, I'm thinking it's going to be more April, to really tell the public, okay, this is our plan. This is our plan for zoning, this is our plan for the public infrastructure piece. So we're getting there. We're very close.
Just a quickie, for those who are interested, or who go to the Makaha, they now have their liquor license back. They do, yes. Their revocation was stayed until the hearing from the ABCC. Pending until the ABCC.
They've appealed.
Until our appeal. So you can go to Makaha.
Yes.
You can go have a couple blizzards or whatever they call those things and.
This is Dairy Queen.
Oh, what do they call those? Oh, scorpions.
The new
Yeah, you
sign
could
says
have-
no staggering allowed.
All right. Order. Any other committee reports? Yes, Mike.
Well, the Minuteman Building Committee had a sort of a breakfast meeting last Friday, and that town officials from all the 16 communities were there, and Janet and some of the others, like the town manager, were there, and I don't know if a lot of progress was made, but it boiled down to a discussion of the agreement of the 16 communities, and apparently 6 communities won out, or considering not being in it, and I guess the complications of how you even get out and the price structure, I think is very complicated, and so my head was ready to explode. So I want to thank you for putting me on that.
You volunteered.
So your update is that your head was going to explode? Or?
Yes, but Nancy will be bringing us, Nancy Banks will bring us up to date on that. They're still on on that assessment, but there's still no firm cost yet. One of the things that they were supposed to talk about last night was some of the design issues and some firm numbers of each scenario, but because of the storm, that didn't happen, so that's deferred as well.
Yes, Marianne.
Mike, I looked at the materials that were posted from the breakfast meeting, and it said something about updates from, and it was like 6 communities. Are those the communities that did not vote to approve the regional agreement last spring? Is that why they're expecting updates from them?
Yes, they have not voted on it yet. Some of them may be considering opting out if they can figure out how to do it, but it's my understanding that that almost has to be a unanimous vote by all the communities in order to let you out, so it's sort of that's where my head started to explode, that, you can't get out once you're in. Right. So it's complicated.
All right. Entertain a motion to adjourn. Second? Anybody second? All in favor? Aye.